Hey guys and welcome back to my channel. This is part 4 of What If Naruto was in Marvel and got a harem. Before we begin, don't forget to like, share and subscribe, and also go and support the author, link in description. Tessa adjusted her glasses, taking a look behind her, especially around the corners. It was a habit, one that was welcome despite its paranoid nature. Even in this relatively isolated part of the city, the streets still had eyes and ears. Satisfied with the low probability of onlookers, Tessa walked further into the alley. It was not as filthy as some of the other ones in this city, and the air did not smell of oil and human waste. It was to be expected from the person Tessa was meaning to meet. Even when maintaining a low profile, Emma Frost still maintained a certain level of standards. She stopped before a set of stone stairs, leading to a building that was flanked by two other constructions. It was almost rustic in appearance, clearly built with traditional tastes in mind. Tessa glanced to her sides again for any onlookers, and climbed the stairs, key in hand. The entrance was home to silence and darkness. It was meant to create the illusion that nobody was occupying it. Tessa was very sure that Emma had left no legal trail behind. On paper and in appearance, the house was a vacated relic. That was, until someone dared to explore deeper. The room that Tessa opened the door to was a complete contrast to the shoddy facade. A golden chandelier gave enough light to compensate for the covered windows. Handmade furniture with intricate decorations filled the place, the largest of which was a large bed with thick rich covers. The second largest was a mahogany desk, where Emma Frost currently sat behind on a plush white chair. To many, the expensive decorations would have caught the eye immediately, if it hadn't been for Emma herself. Tessa, however, had spent enough time around the White Queen to know about her pricey tastes. If anything, this was Emma being thrifty. "Tessa," greeted Emma, taking a sip from a cup that was probably more expensive than most made in a year. The words poured like honey out of her blue-painted lips, and a smile showed perfectly white teeth. "Your presence is welcome, but I believe that I told you to run the institute for me while I'm gone." As always, Emma Frost was dressed in white. As always, the outfit hid little and hinted at more. Her body was as effective a weapon as her mind, and like any good weapon, it was crafted to perfection. Most of the time, the White Queen didn't even need to use her powers to sway men, and more than a few women, to her ways. "I make a rather inadequate replacement for the real Emma Frost," Tessa replied simply. "There are matters that require your attention both with the institute and the club." Emma rolled her eyes and sighed. "What is Shaw blathering about now? He would not tell me. He only told me that I should look for you." Emma pursed her lips. "Tell him that I am busy and that my actions are for the benefit of the Hellfire Club." "I told him, and still he insisted." "Let him insist to his heart's content. A queen is not a servant," replied Emma. Tessa did not prod further. Once Emma had made up her mind, there was little anyone could do to dissuade her. The best course of action now would be to help her finish her goals. "You have covered your tracks well. Not even the other instructors in Massachusetts know of your location. I doubt even the club knows of what you are currently doing. Everything here is legal under another name, of course. Sarah White, who also owns a small office a couple of blocks from here, where she sees her patients. Those psychology studies are not just for show. You are seeing patients. A couple. One of them left after just a couple of sessions. Turns out that she had a bad case of repressed sexual desires with her husband. A true masochist. I gave her a little nudge and a physical session and sent her on her way." "It sounds like you are her dominatrix, not her therapist." Emma smiled. "Tessa, darling, is there any real difference between the two? And what of your efforts with the vigilantes?" If Tessa's calculations had been correct, there was only one plausible scenario by which Emma would have used them. With their abilities, Wilson Fisk could plausibly be defeated within days, unless you're taking the slower route. "Careful is the way I would phrase it," retorted Emma. "A move so brazen would doubtlessly set the club's eye upon me at the very least. They cannot know what I plan." "And your plan is to employ vigilantes?" The White Queen smirked. "Yes, if you can call what I'm offering employment." "What have you offered him?" "Nothing of physical value," was Emma's reply. "For a young man his age, there are more important things than money." A teenager in puberty can be easily manipulated with promises of female sexual reciprocity, concurred Tessa. Emma Frost certainly never saw any issue with using her body to her benefit. Emma shook her head. That's the brilliant thing about this boy. He doesn't care a single bit about my body. Oh, he looks, of course. Every straight male his age would, but he is only interested in seeing a distressed lady safe. It's probably the first young man that thinks with his heart, rather than what's between his legs. I see. You think highly of him, then. She scoffed. Most have the excuse of allowing their hormones to take over. He is far more naive. Disdain hid a wounded ego. Emma had been physically rejected, it seemed, and by a hormonal teenager at that. It wasn't about attraction now, it was about pride. Many had laid eyes on her, and few ever received attention in return, even fewer had been offered intimacy. But nobody had ever rejected Emma Frost. Tessa was smart enough to let that observation go unspoken. He is from Xavier's Institute, correct? Is that why you chose to approach him instead of the devil? The White Queen sipped on her tea. That's one reason. I knew from the start that he had more to hide than the other two. And I was right, by a lot. Oh. He is a telepath. A blue fire was ignited in Emma's eyes. I realized it as soon as I met him. He has neglected that ability, but it's there. The fire in her eyes increased. And that's not all. He has other powers, some of which he told me are inherited. His body is unbelievably resilient, and he has special eyes. Tessa barely pursed her lips. This level of interest had not been considered in her list of outcomes. It's curious, isn't it, Tessa? How such genetic marvels can exist. Is he more than a tool now? Do you plan on bringing him to our fold? To groom him for the club? Goodness no. He is a means to an end. Emma was not being completely honest. Tessa had known her long enough to know that. Despite his age, the maelstrom had piqued an interest from the White Queen. This was not according to plan, but it was too late to change minds now. It did not matter. She was Tessa. She was sage. She assessed. She planned. She acted. A little extra work would be no trouble. I must return to the institute, she said, turning to the door. No. Tessa returned her gaze on Emma as a folder was slid on the desk. Bayville High. That's the school Xavier's students go to. Their principal disappeared a while back, and they are in need of a replacement. It wasn't too hard to find a candidate. Tessa gave a simple nod. As you wish. She took the folder with her as she exited the building. The chaos of the city drowned any other noises inside. Tessa opened the folder and saw the starting date of her new assignment. Tomorrow. The maelstrom had truly piqued Emma's interest. You could have snuck in some pasta, you know. Naruto smiled sheepishly, picking up the expensive chocolate bar he'd smuggled through a scroll. Smuggling in food was meant to be forbidden, but he thought that Wanda had been improving well enough to deserve it. Pasta would have been a mess, so instead he snuck in some chocolate. Girls really seemed to like chocolate. Kitty always smiled and kissed him when he got her some, at least. I haven't tried much with food yet. Plus, you don't want your first pasta dish to be inside this place, do you? He reached for the chocolate. Well, if you don't want it, Wanda's fingers hastily snatched the treat and tore the packaging open just as quickly. Naruto watched with a smile as the dullness of her green eyes was lifted slightly at the first bite. He was right, girls love chocolate. Do you want to talk? He asked now that Wanda was in better spirits. What is it you want to talk about? She laughed humorlessly. I can tell you about last week. I woke up, had some pills, did some boring activities, had some more pills, then we ate along with another healthy serving of pills and after that. Why don't you tell me about your life before coming here, interjected Naruto. So far, Wanda had cooperated so long, as she could imagine any other place than the asylum. All right, started Wanda, taking in a deep breath. My mother was named Magda, a gypsy woman that fell in love with my father, who was a Holocaust survivor and a mutant. Magneto went on a killing spree one day and she fled to the mountains while she was pregnant, eventually finding refuge in a place called Wundagore. Naruto nodded. It's an intense story, but nothing really crazy. She took another deep breath. My mother met a cow woman named Bova Ayrshire, who helped deliver me and my brother. She was a creation of the High Evolutionary, with other animal men serving as his knights. Mother died soon after childbirth and we grew up learning English by watching American sitcoms. At age 7, I started to get some abilities which drew the attention of a witch coven. Magneto discovered us soon after and took me and Pietro away to America. When Magneto realized that he couldn't help me with my powers, he decided to lock me in here and forget that I even existed. She finished with a blank stare. There, call me crazy. His response was swift. The day I was born, a 9-tailed monster fox attacked my village. My parents died that same night. The leader of my village sealed the monster fox inside me and nobody told me until I graduated from ninja school. I did tell you that I'm a ninja, right? 'Cause I'm a ninja. Her response was the same poker face. Anyway, I got put in this team with my crush and a real pain in the ass who later ended up being my best friend. So, this best friend's older brother killed their entire family and later on joined an organization that wanted to get the monster fox, and his partner was a shark man with a shark sword. Sasuke, that's my douchebag best friend, then escaped because he wanted more power to kill his even bigger douchebag brother. I was sent to bring him back and he tried to kill me, but instead I was transported from another galaxy and I ended up here. Wanda still didn't move a muscle. Oh, and I didn't tell you that my douchebag best friend and his douchebag older brother both came from a clan full of douchebags with special eyes. Only guess what? When I arrived here, I realized that I also had these special eyes, which means that I'm at least partially a douchebag. He turned his eyes red for a moment to show her. And, well, that's the long and short of it, really. Wanda took another bite of her chocolate and slowly chewed on it. Are you telling me the truth? She asked after a long silence. Everyone always told me that I'm a terrible liar. Deafening silence was the only response that could be heard at first, interrupted only briefly by Wanda finishing the last bit of her treat. Finally, after wiping her mouth, she gave a single, dry chuckle. Would it be hypocritical to call you crazy? There's nothing wrong with being a little crazy, he replied, grinning. So long as it isn't the rocking back and forth in a straitjacket and singing creepy lullabies kind of crazy. Wanda made a quick smile, this time wide enough to show her teeth. I don't think my wardens would tolerate any kind of craziness, even when it's the truth. I believe you, he said. There was no reason for Wanda to lie, not in this state, and she didn't seem like the type who would lie. So, Magneto left you here because you can't control your powers. A single, solemn nod was her response. I never wanted to do the things I did. They just happened. I got angry with Magneto when he tried to train me, and later he made me live in isolation, which only made me angrier, and the incidents got worse. The pills make the powers go away, but they also make me feel incomplete. Briefly, Naruto imagined what it would be like with the Kyuubi. What if he had gone on a rampage and the Hokage decided that the only way to prevent it was to seal his chakra away completely? Would he be relieved that he wouldn't hurt those close to him? Sure, but to be unable to achieve his dreams. To never feel the surge of power when his physical and spiritual energy molded together. What about his telepathic abilities? Yes, he did his best to suppress the urge to read the thoughts of those around him, and yet there were certain factors that he couldn't control, and quite honestly, didn't truly want to. One of those was that he always could feel Kitty's happiness when they were close. To be torn away from all of that, despite the burdens these powers placed on him. He could hardly blame Wanda for looking so broken all the time. When you come out, do you think you will be able to control it? Maybe now that you're older? He asked. Wanda closed her palm on the candy wrapper until her knuckles turned white. I don't know. Naruto placed his hands on hers. I will help you, however I can. That I can promise you. I'll ask the professor for any techniques to help control you if things go overboard. Do you think that will help? I don't know, replied Wanda with a strangled cry. She was getting tired now, he could see it in her eyes. He looked at his watch. Their time was almost over. He stood up and knelt beside her. Get some rest. I'll be back next week, I promise. There was a knock on the door. 2 guards came inside with a straitjacket, accompanied by an orderly with a syringe. The needle was plunged on Wanda's neck. The life that Naruto had been working so hard for immediately left her eyes. Her mouth opened dumbly, and her gaze went to the ground. Hey, said Naruto to the orderly. Has the doctor read my proposal? I've really advanced with her, I think she may be ready to come out in. Go out. The orderly laughed. No offense, kid, but the girl is too dangerous to be let out. Don't take it personally. Just leave it to the professionals. Once the guards had finished restraining Wanda, they made her stand up and walk outside. But before she left, a brief struggle with herself took place, enough to send him a final look, a wordless cry for help. Naruto exited the hospital gates with a rotten taste in his mouth. Just as he was about to jump towards the institute, he felt a chill go through his spine. The woods to his side felt different now, as if it was somehow alive. Naruto activated his eyes, looking for any signs of life. None, not even animals. His boots crunched over the fallen leaves as he walked further between the trees, his body ready for any sudden attack. Who would attack him now? Why here? He arrived at a small clearing, almost like a carefully planted grove, filled with life yet also dead at the same time, until he felt a jolt coming from behind a large maple trunk. From behind the tree stepped an old woman, clad in varying shades of purple. Her hair was pure white with age. Her face was extremely thin, wrinkly skin sticking to her bones. A black cat was held on her arms, and secured on her neck was a peculiar locket. Finally, Naruto saw her eyes. If the woman was old, then her eyes were ancient. "Who are you?" asked Naruto, his stance uneasy despite the woman's age. The woman stood silent for what felt like hours. "The girl," she finally said. "You wish to help her, do you not?" Naruto kept his guard. "What's it to you? Even if you get her out of this place, it will not help. You are powerful, boy, the same as her, but you cannot hope to understand her power. Even if you let her out, it will destroy her." Once again, the woman answered a question he did not ask. He stood his ground. "I'm not going to let her stay locked in that place forever. I promised I would let her out, and I never break my promises." "You do not," agreed the old woman. "The girl must be released from that prison. But what then? In order to survive, she needs proper guidance." She turned to leave. "When you break her out, I will be ready to instruct her." The woman walked back behind the tree. "Wait." Naruto stepped to where the woman had disappeared, and saw nothing. For the next hour, the blonde looked all over the woods for the aged stranger, with nothing to show for his effort. It was as if she had been a figment of his imagination, and given the lack of traceable evidence that she was even there, he was half convinced she had been. As he was sprinting back to the institute, Naruto could only think of Wanda. The asylum was not going to let Wanda go, and the old woman had so assuredly said that he would break her out. Everything was like a foggy mystery, and yet through the terrible confusion, he was completely sure of one thing. No matter the cost, he was breaking Wanda out of there. Not for the professor, not for the old woman, not even for himself. Just for her. The pain of being alone, it really is unbearable, isn't it? Those were Naruto's words to a boy with blood-red hair. A boy that Jean knew very well. A boy named Gaara. It was a memory, one that Jean had already seen around a dozen times, yet it never failed to stab her heart with countless emotions. Having pieced together the many segments from previous nights, she had learned of the full story, only one of the many stories in Naruto's past. A life of woe, pain, cruelty, and hope, the life of a ninja. Given how hyperactive Naruto could be, Jean was actually surprised at how well organized his memories were. Before her link with him, Jean had unintentionally walked in on the minds of others during the night, and most of them were absolute chaos. It might be dark and a little damp, but the relative stability was second only to Aurora's soothingly beautiful landscapes. A little training in maintenance and it would be downright pleasant. I should help him to make a nice little divan, at least, she mused. Jean knew her body was truly resting in a comfortable bed, but it would still be nice to not be walking shin-deep into tepid water in her sleep. Jean walked out the room, once again sighing at the rows upon rows of doors. Naruto's memories were organized, but why did they have to look so dreary? She picked one door at random, hoping that it would let her out of the dream. She sighed once she saw more darkness. More memories. Jean smiled when she felt her feet warm up. The water was more pleasant during happy memories, Naruto didn't have many of those. As always, she saw the memories come start with a flash of light, only this time there were many. Jean immediately felt something about all of them. The presences, they were all women. Naruto's relationship with women was interesting, to say the least. Jean felt ashamed to think that after Duncan, the only way she saw men thinking about women was as sexual objects. But Naruto was far more complicated. His first memory of the opposite sex was not of a loving mother or an excited aunt, not even a kind grandmother. Naruto had none of those growing up. Instead, it was of a pink-haired girl. Sakura Haruno had been prominent in Naruto's first memories, first as his classmate and later as his teammate. She had shown kindness to him once when they were children, and she was cute. Naruto spent a long time trying to win her over. But Naruto didn't love her. Not really. He hadn't even really experienced what it was to be loved yet. It was envy that made him concentrate on Sakura. She was interested in the black-haired boy, Sasuke, Naruto's best friend and rival. Sakura was really just another arena to compete in. The real relationship between them was of friends, with her as a nagging older sister type, but friends nonetheless. Another woman came into view, an older woman. Tsunade had been an irresponsible drunken gambler the first time Naruto met her. Afterwards, she became an important female figure to Naruto, the first to give him that affection he craved for so dearly. It was motherly more than anything, the ninja idea of motherly at least. That being that she was constantly trying to maintain control of the blonde's proclivity for trouble. Darkness once again, only for a few moments, but she felt the emotions soar immediately, and a seconds later, she saw two figures appear. One was Aurora, the other was herself. The moment Naruto met them had become a shock. Two young women, of his age, that were nice to him. Tsunade cared about him, even Sakura, but not in a nice way. Their way of caring was harsh. Encouragement was done via a closed fist whenever he screwed up. With time, Naruto started to realize that he longed for a very different kind of love, especially at the end of their time with them, when he stopped paying much attention to Sakura. By contrast, both she and Aurora encouraged him, cheered him on when he did good. In truth, Jean didn't realize how much this had changed Naruto's perception of the opposite sex. She was just being naturally welcoming to the new member of the institute, and got a new friend. And ever since, Naruto wanted more. He chose her over Aurora mostly because of their lessons with the professor. It didn't seem like he knew what he was doing as he tried to get closer to her. He just desired a deeper connection, one that went beyond just friends, except that not even he realized how deep he wanted it to be. Jean had been kind in rejecting him. At one point because she was still with that asshole Duncan Matthews, and later because she had no interest in a relationship. There was some pain, but not too much, mainly because of what would come. Emotions reached a fever pitch with the entrance of the next figure. Catherine Pride had managed to offer Naruto everything that both Aurora and Jean herself had offered him, and more. Unlike Jean, Kitty had always made her interest crystal clear, and if there was one thing that could be said about the girl, she was persistent. For a time, Naruto was still clinging to Jean, hoping for her to reciprocate his attempts to get closer. With time, however, Kitty's consistency began to have an effect. Ever so slowly, Naruto began to drift away from Jean into someone who would readily give him that affection that he so craved. Jean had little time to feel regret, for another person came into view. With a lonely and troubled childhood, Rogue really should have had more success with Naruto than she did. Her main mistake was that she had tried to be subtle. Naruto didn't understand subtlety, he understood clear statements delivered with the grace of a sledgehammer. Rogue had also been unfortunate enough to not have met Naruto sooner. Eventually, Kitty solidified her hold on Naruto, the day he confessed the truth about himself. The significance of being loved in spite of his tenet made Naruto forget about every other female except the one that had confessed first. No small feat, considering that there were still other female figures to come. There was a girl with red hair. She was pretty now, but with time she would become an absolute knockout beauty. Rogue was still there as well, attractive despite her dark fashion sense. Sue Storm had never left his thoughts, either. Another, more recent girl also had become present in Naruto's life, Wanda, the girl from the asylum. Aurora and Jean had never left either, even if Jean was no longer the center of his attention. It didn't matter. Naruto would no longer pay that attention to any of them, for fear of losing Catherine pride, fear of losing what he had longed for all his life. Jean pondered on what Rogue had once said, that Kitty would have to be the one that broke off the relationship. She had been right. Naruto would never finish it willingly. Kitty had been either lucky or smart, to pursue someone who might have several glaring flaws but had all the right virtues. Not for the first time did Jean think of her own relationship problems. Either way, I should probably leave. These were some of Naruto's most intimate memories. She had already felt dirty for seeing less important ones. But just as Jean was about to leave, she felt one more presence snaking its way in. White is what she saw. Before a figure, a body, or even a face, white. Bright white clothes, pale white skin, white blonde hair, until finally some blue in the form of her lips and her eyes. A face began to form, along with a body. The woman was older than Jean, even if it almost didn't appear to be so. She was confident. She was glamorous. She was mature. Most of all, she was beautiful. Her clothes, Jean felt her face grow red. What kind of woman would be comfortable dressing like that in public? As soon as the scene began to unfurl, she realized why. It was a strip club. Had she been wrong about Naruto? Was he like all the others, looking for something on the side? Did she misunderstand his feelings for Kitty? It couldn't be. She was the world to him right now. So how could something like this happen? Her guilt returned when she saw further. It was one of his vigilante missions. The strip club was owned by criminals, and the woman was apparently a victim. Figures. Naruto always helps those in need. A name came along with a tear-filled plea for help, one that was impossible for Naruto to ignore. It all seemed like another day for him, helping people that were in need, no matter who they were. That was simply who Naruto was. And yet this woman, Jean just knew she was more than a stripper. It was the way she carried herself, and the way she talked. Every inch of Emma's body told Jean that something was wrong with the White Queen. The investigation was cut short. Any other moment, Jean would have been relieved to leave Naruto's mind, exciting as his memories were. Not this time. She needed to know more. About this woman. About what Naruto was doing at night. As she felt herself wake up to the first rays of sunlight, a single question burned in her mind. Who was this, Emma? Hey Nat. Natasha already knew the voice, and knew who the person was just by the slightly muffled footsteps. Clint, she acknowledged with a whisper. How was the assignment? She could feel him smile at her side. You know me, I never miss. He turned his attention towards what Natasha was keeping her gaze on. What crawled up his ass now? He was referring to their boss, Nick Fury, who was currently pacing back and forth, his lone eye narrowed and glaring. We're getting visitors today, responded another voice, Maria Hill. If Nick Fury was anywhere, she would almost always be behind. Natasha nodded. FBI, CIA, NSA, the Pentagon, pretty much all the other agencies. It seems that the money that Washington sent us has some strings attached. Clint gave a dramatic sigh. I was kind of enjoying being the guy under the radar, you know. All the suits kind of annoy me. That's why I joined up with you guys in the first place. Yeah, but that new Ferrari you bought with your increased salary isn't free, replied Maria with a small smirk. For my part, it's kind of nice that we're finally getting noticed. I guess we're no longer the headcases of American national security. We still are. Aliens falling from the sky in the middle of New York, billionaires in armored suits, world-renowned scientists turning into rampaging green giants, old men controlling metal. It's the world that has finally caught up with our craziness, replied Natasha. The chat was cut short when the doors to the meeting room opened. In walked several people, many of whom Natasha knew. There was Edgar Sims, Secretary of Defense, William Sanderson, Deputy Director of the FBI, and Chris Hutchinson, Director of the NSA. The last one to enter was the new face of the agencies, James Smith, Director of the Central Intelligence Agency. Colonel Fury greeted Smith with a smile. I've heard much about you from my friends in Langley. Quite the legacy you left behind. Fury said nothing aside from a handshake. The others were not as complimentary. Most of them frowned at Fury, who frowned back in response. Eventually, they all took their seats and an uncomfortable silence settled in the room. It was Fury who spoke first. I know you all cursed me out the moment Washington decided to increase S.H.I.E.L.D.'s budget. That was the Colonel, straight and to the point. He always hated weaseling around issues. And yet I believe that S.H.I.E.L.D. will be on the front lines from now on, just as we once were in the past. Christ, Hutchinson's mouth twitched. In the past. That is an apt choice of words, Fury. When I saw your name come up, I almost thought it was still the 50s and my father was telling me bedtime stories. They were good at putting children to sleep. Fury turned his eye to Hutchinson. You must know a lot about sleeping children, Hutchinson. Civilian children mostly, and their parents, since that's what the NSA is focused on surveilling nowadays. Hutchinson narrowed his eyes. This might come as a surprise to you, Colonel, but most of the bad guys these days don't dress up in costumes and name their organizations like a Saturday morning cartoon. Most of them hide among us, speak our language, eat our food, and ride the same bus as us. The war you knew ended a long time ago. The Red Skull was never found, said Fury. Hydra was never destroyed. Ah, yes, we heard of your exploits during the war. A war that has been over for almost 60 years. Captain America, Hydra, and the Red Skull. Ghosts of the past. How old would the Red Skull be today? 90. 100 years old. Forgive us if the thought a long-dead Nazi scientist isn't at the forefront of our worries. Ghosts cannot hurt us anymore, responded Sanderson. The age of heroes and villains is over, Colonel. You are its last remnant. You are wrong, Fury said sharply. The age of heroes and villains is just beginning. This world is about to get a hell of a lot stranger than your wildest imagination. And I assume you are finally going to tell us why? Asked Sims, grabbing the folder in front of him. The other men quieted down at the Secretary of Defense's baritone voice. Let's start with an incident almost 1 year ago. An anomaly in New York, reported to be a humanoid alien. S.H.I.E.L.D. was the first to make contact, no perpetrator was ever apprehended. He sent a sharp look at Fury. S.H.I.E.L.D.'s director made not even the slightest movement as he responded. The perpetrator was reached by other individuals. I happen to know a man who works for these individuals and decided the best course of action to not interfere directly. Protests started to erupt from around the table. That said, I am still closely observing the situation. Then I believe you will enlighten us. Asked Sanderson. This will only work if there is true cooperation between S.H.I.E.L.D. and the rest of us, agreed Smith. Fury's eye darted across the table. Complete silence reigned as the colonel studied each and every one of the men seated around him. I will, he finally said, turning to the large screen in front of the table. An image came up of a young and handsome man. He was tall, with blue eyes, with a chiseled face that would make women's hearts throb. At first glance he seemed like just another man, if a physically attractive one, until the second image appeared. It was the same man, but with two large wings sticking out his back, decorated with pure white feathers. The images changed, this time to a surveillance recording on repeat. In it was a man. A security guard by the look of his uniform. He walked over to a woman and knocked her out with an impressive display of martial prowess. But that was not the shocking part. The shocking part was that the guard shifted. He became a she, a blue-skinned she. Quickly, the shapeshifter took the woman's clothes as well as her appearance. She smirked to the camera before shooting at it. Another video came forward, showing another woman. Dark-skinned and breathtakingly beautiful, she rose towards the sky, white hair trailing behind her. The air transformed around her, and fat clouds were summoned where there was once a clear view of the stars, spitting lightning and rain with exquisite fury. Smith raised his voice. What are they? They are mutants. A genetic evolution of common humans, each born with a distinctive trait or power. Controlling metal, manipulating the weather, even nigh indestructibility. They have coined the term Homo superior as their scientific classification, explained Fury. Hutchinson narrowed his eyes. Homo superior. And I believe that they would classify us as Homo inferior. Or perhaps they call us Untermensch. I've read enough history to know where this line of thinking goes. Did they have hostile intentions? That is not a simple question, replied Fury. An image came on the screen of a bald man on a wheelchair, flanked by a short but heavily built man. Some profess a peaceful philosophy. This is Professor Charles Xavier. His institute detects, recruits, and educates mutants to live side by side with us. Many of them cannot control their abilities without proper training. Others, however, the image of a helmeted figure, clad in purple and red regalia, are not as peaceful. Even nerves of steel could not stop the seasoned men in the room from stiffening at the sight. Magneto believes that the only way for his kind to survive is to destroy non-mutants. He was in the process of recruiting before he disappeared. Some think him dead. Some are idiots, thought Natasha. Sims raised his brow. This is indeed a revelation, Fury, yet it only begets more questions. How is it that these mutants came to be? From what Professor Xavier has told me, mutants have been around since recorded history. They are the next step of evolution, according to him. He has theorized that the reason for the dramatic increase of their numbers has to do with newfound technology, especially nuclear and chemical energy. Some of these mutants were descendants of those exposed to radiation. In this country, more than a few have been linked to parents that served in Vietnam, during the use of Agent Orange. And you are telling us this New York anomaly was a mutant? Fury nodded. Professor Xavier was there to pick him up. Magneto also desired him. They would not have done this for an alien. From what I understand, he has been trained to prevent the incident from happening again. Sanderson frowned. Don't take it personally when I say that I can't trust your mutant friend. I believe we should make a list of all these men and women for security's sake. Smith spoke next. What of the vigilantes we've been hearing about? The Devil, the Spider-Man, and the Maelstrom. Fury nodded towards Natasha. They're all from Earth, she responded promptly, squashing the uncomfortable feeling of being the center of attention of all the alphabet agencies. The Devil is all human, an extremely well-trained and capable human, but a human nonetheless. The Spider-Man has increased stamina and other special abilities, but he constantly runs his mouth with enough pop culture trivia that it's pretty clear he's from here. The Maelstrom, from what I can see, is a rogue mutant with unknown capabilities. Have you discovered the identity of the Maelstrom? Asked Smith. Fury shook his head. Not yet. It was a lie. Natasha had already tracked the young man to the Xavier Institute and studied him for several months. The New York anomaly and the Maelstrom were the same person, Naruto Uzumaki. He had his own unique abilities. How he got such powers is unknown. Other than that, it was understandable why he wouldn't be identified as an alien. He was, just like a normal young man, at least in terms of his behavior. He goes to school, gets good grades, even has an Earth girlfriend. She did not mention this. Fury had deceived for a reason. When many truths were shared, there was a chance for a single, unsuspicious lie. The Colonel had chosen this particular thing to lie about. Sims tapped at his notes. Either way, the Maelstrom is not our priority. You said yourself that these mutants are from Earth. Right now, your main objective is elsewhere. He motioned for his aide to take control of the screen. The video was of a raging storm, where the clouds covered everything in darkness, except when violent shocks of lightning thrust across the sky, quick as a serpent's strike. It's a pretty picture. I'm sure National Geographic would pay us something for it, joked Clint. Fury narrowed his eye. Is there something that we're supposed to be seeing here? Look closer, responded Sims. The video played again, slower this time. Natasha paid a closer eye this time. If her sight didn't fail her, she could swear 2 of the lightning bolts were fatter than the rest. A quick replay justified her suspicions. The Colonel noticed it as well. Focus on the lightning bolt on the left. The footage zoomed to the ray of thunder. For a split second, Natasha saw a bulge travel across the pale path. Slower, ordered Fury. An up-close shot of the bolt was blurry, but the bulge became clear, giving Natasha the impression of a large snake that had swallowed a live prey with a lot of fight still in it. Through the blinding white of the bolt, a darker object emerged. She narrowed her eyes as the image became clearer. It looked like an oversized mallet. That's an odd meteorite, said Clint. Maria smirked but said nothing. All of the directors watched monotonously at the screen, almost waiting for an elaborate joke to be revealed. Fury frowned. Go to the other one. The second bolt was even larger than the first, and the bulge was also fatter. All across the table, the directors were finally broken from their apathy. To have one oddly shaped meteorite was a particular oddity, but 2. That was no longer mere circumstance. Indeed, once again the recording began to focus on the bulge, and this time it was no mallet. 4 limbs, and a muscular torso, topped with a head and long hair. If her eyes were not playing tricks on her, Natasha was sure that the figure was a man. "That man is dead," noted Smith. "We thought the same thing. Until we reached the landing site," replied Sims. He showed a still picture of a clearing. The nearby trees had bent opposite to the center of the clearing like a perfect circle, which had once been evidently filled with grass but was now burnt black, with the exception of the center, in which the grass still grew, in the shape of a man. "We found nothing on the other landing site, either." The mood deadened. All of the bickering men now concentrated on what they were seeing. Sanderson grit his teeth. "There has to be some evidence as to the perpetrator. Didn't you interrogate the locals?" The only weird thing they saw was a skinny blonde man with a bad leg who said he was a doctor. Nothing else. "We tried to track the man down, but the trail went cold in New York." Hutchinson reclined back on his chair, pressing his fingers to temples. Out of his suit, he pulled out a disc and handed it to the assistant. "Since we're all being honest," he sighed. It was another piece of surveillance footage, this time it was clear as day. It wasn't as hard to spot the anomaly as before, fast as it was. Across the sky, a figure zipped from one end of the screen to the other. "Just because he flies doesn't mean he's an alien," argued Fury. Natasha whispered a snort. The world truly had gone insane in the last year. A still image was zoomed. "We have run his identification through our databases. Here and abroad. No matter how hard we have tried to locate him, there is not a match." Pictured was a muscular man with blonde hair and a mask around his eyes, wearing a black and red outfit. At the center of the suit was a golden symbol that resembled a star. "We researched the symbol as best we could. No historian or archaeologist gave us a satisfactory answer. The star had 8 points, with the vertical and horizontal ones larger than the diagonal ones." Natasha tried to remember her history lessons from her training. Nothing came up. "Could just be something a kid doodled," whispered Clint, only to receive an elbow from Maria. The head of the CIA shook his head. "I'm not convinced the man is not of Earth. Especially after what Colonel Fury has told us about the mutants. There just isn't enough evidence." "Oh. Is there anything the spooks want to add to this?" mocked Hutchinson. Smith gave a small glare, but nonetheless placed a suitcase on the desk. There were several locks that had to be opened with 4 keys. 2 were in Smith's possession, the other 2 with his assistants. Inside were several pictures that he carefully handed to Sims. Once projected, Natasha could see that the pictures captured the image of a humanoid. He, if he was truly he, was wearing a strange fabric. It was his skin that stood out. It was green. "Is this a prank?" asked Hutchinson. It wasn't just him, the rest of the room looked at the images as if it were some sort of joke being pulled by a kid with computer skills to upload it to some Area 51 conspiracy site. "I'm afraid not. The subject was neutralized during a mission in which suspected terrorist activity was taking place. The creature looked like a human, until it was dead. That was when it reverted to its true form. After an extensive autopsy, we discovered that the subject had features that would allow it to change shapes. They can assume the identity of a regular human and we wouldn't even know it." At her side, Natasha saw Clint rub his eyes and chuckle. This year was bad enough without reptilians being an actual thing. Anybody got David Icke on speed dial? Maria elbowed him again. This was a serious matter. The shapeshifting mutant was already bad enough, but to now realize that they were dealing with an entire species of shapeshifters. They could impersonate anyone they wished to and nobody would even notice. The next minutes were of silent contemplation. Even if all these people had a slight dislike of one another, they were all supposed to serve under one flag. It was now when an agreement would have to be reached. "Colonel Fury," called Sims, pulling out a letter. "This comes directly from the Commander-in-Chief. As of now, with your new funding, all further investigation of extraterrestrial threats will be deferred to you. All of our information will be handed to S.H.I.E.L.D. On the other hand, we will expect that any information about national security be deferred to us. That is how Washington wants it." Fury sat still, his eyes switching from peer to peer, until finally he nodded. "The President's orders," he agreed. The air was easier to breathe once the visitors had left, but Fury didn't drop his guard. He never dropped his guard. Snapping his fingers, Natasha stepped to his right, Clint to his left and Maria at his back. Guards stopped in their tracks to salute them, but they never stopped until they reached the elevator leading to the deepest part of the complex. In the room were two men, one of them looking to be in his mid-40s and the other in his late 30s. The former was Vernon Van Dyne, and his companion was Hank Pym. Both were world-renowned scientists that had eagerly joined up with S.H.I.E.L.D. after the latest funding made it possible to embark on their most ambitious projects. Van Dyne, despite being ridiculed for it by the rest of the scientific community, had a fascination with extraterrestrial life. He was a perfect fit for S.H.I.E.L.D., with their newfound interest in what lay beyond their reclusive little corner of the universe. On the other hand, was Hank Pym, a brilliant mind that had been obsessed with his own special particles. Natasha had heard rumors that their purpose was to alter the size and mass of living and non-living organisms. It was his life's work, and it showed. His obsession rivaled Reed Richards'. Even Natasha took some time off between missions. Clint grinned at the sight of the older scientist. "Vern, you're not going to believe what's happened. Looks like there are more green-skinned visitors in our midst." Dr. Van Dyne's eyes lit up like the stars he spent nights obsessing over. "Really? You mean there's more than just the maelstrom?" Nick narrowed his eye. "You were trusted with that information and it has stayed between only a select few people. The true identity of the maelstrom does not leave this facility. Not to friends, not even to family. We have to approach the situation carefully." He took a breath and kept his silence for a few seconds. "But yes, there are apparently more of them out there, at least. I can't trust everything that was said in that room. There may be less and there may be more. You'll be given the details in time." "How exhilarating. Hopefully I will be able to get a few minutes to talk to one of them. By the way, if you're going to arrest the maelstrom, could you ask him for an autograph first? My daughter has taken a bit of a liking for the young man." Natasha suppressed a snort. The maelstrom seemed to be the only thing the Van Dyne girl liked more than maxing out Daddy's credit cards. She recalled her own first meeting with the alien blonde with amusement. He appeared to have a fondness for helping women in need. The damsel in distress technique always worked on the altruistic types. "I told you to leave the kid to me, Nick." Everybody moved at once. Natasha stepped in front of Fury and at her side, Clint showed why he'd been hired aside from his big mouth. An arrow had already been knocked and drawn in a fraction of a second. Maria stayed behind Fury, but with a pistol in one hand and a radio on the other. The colonel, however, had not moved a single inch. "You haven't lost your touch, Logan," grunted Fury. From the shadows appeared a man dressed in a S.H.I.E.L.D. uniform, though on closer inspection, it was a little too big for the man in height, but at the same time too small to contain the muscles. "You haven't lost your touch, either." The man lit a cigar, the fire revealing a wild-looking face with messy sideburns. "I can't say the same about your men. Good help is hard to find, Wolverine. You are always welcome to return and teach the new generation. I heard you're good at doing that nowadays." Wolverine grunted and puffed out some smoke. "I'm done with S.H.I.E.L.D. Don't take it personally. Not until I figure out what happened during those years after I parted ways with you." "Why come all the way here, then?" Silence dominated the room. Wolverine's face turned serious as he took a drag from his cigar. "I came here to warn about the coming danger." Fury responded with a humorless chuckle. "Danger is the one thing I don't ever need to be warned about. I'm in a pit of snakes, Logan. Most of them attack the moment they see me, but it's the ones that pretend to be your friend that are the most dangerous." Wolverine puffed out more smoke. "Do you remember the war, Nick? Whatever happened to those secret bases that the Red Skull left? We kept watch over them for several decades, just in case somebody came back. After the fall of the Soviet Union, however, it was decided to abandon the surveillance. We demolished them to make sure no Hydra agent could take advantage of the situation." Wolverine nodded. "Figures that you would do that. It's why I didn't bother to tell you about the base in the Alps." Fury glared. "You kept that kind of information from me. Not just from you. From everyone. And it had the effect I wished for. None of those bases were ever visited because the remnants of Hydra knew you were watching them. Don't you think it funny that they started to become so elusive after the fall of the Third Reich? They found new patrons, ones that apparently had more information than we would have wished." Wolverine fished for something inside his pockets. "Did you ever follow up on that attack on Stark Tower?" The feds took over that situation. The men responsible left no trace behind by the time I sent Widow to infiltrate the investigation. You should have followed it. The kid was the only one to be with the leader before he died. He told me something, and I took off to investigate that old base. From his pocket came out a disc, which he launched towards the colonel. Fury promptly handed it over to Maria, who had already grabbed a laptop. The equipment may be old, but the same communications are used even after all these years. It's smart of them. Most agencies concentrate on the new equipment. It took a little bit of decryption work, nothing that Forge couldn't help me with. Maria opened up the disk and retrieved the only thing that was inside the folder. Once she opened it, the laptop's speakers came to life with the recording of an almost unrecognizable voice. The one-eyed foe still sleeps, even as we have planted our eggs in the eagle's nest, but things have become dangerous. The land of the maimed bear suits our needs. Deep in the forest our secret lies. The project will soon be completed, and the world will be won. Natasha stared at the screen. What does it mean? She asked. Wolverine took another drag of his cigar. It means Hydra is back. Nodding, Fury tightened his fist. And they're closer than we think. The nights on the ruined projects were usually silent. Mike knew that because of how often he'd walked through them. Empty with the exception of a few junkies, they were perfect for the crime organizations to make their deals, cliché as it might be. It's the reason why Mike was in there, to spy on a deal being made between the Irish mob and the Magia. He expected it to be the same as always, quiet with the exception of stereotypically accented voices bitching about changed prices and inferior quality of products. This night had not been silent at all. He had been crouching behind a window when he heard the ear-pounding cracks that heralded the rain of bullets. By instinct, he dropped to the floor and flattened his body as much as it allowed. Screams were silenced by the gunfire that by sound alone, Mike knew was too high caliber for a common hood. Again, and again the lead came, without mercy, until every last voice was no more. Silence returned like a presence that could be a comforting ally or a deadly foe. Mike sucked in as much of the cold air as he could without making a sound and slowly pushed his body upwards so as to not disturb the silence, and finally set his sight on the meeting. The men that had been threatening each other were still there, on the ground, their bodies completely torn apart. There were large chunks of concrete on the floor that had once been part of the wall, where the bullets had come from, bullets so large that they had severed limbs and still had enough force to punch through to the other side of the wall. Mike would have cursed in fear, but that would end the silence. But the silence was disturbed, not by him, nor by any of the dead men. Heavy footsteps landed inside the room, each sounding like a sledgehammer that was hitting at Mike's heart. He heard the man inspect his gruesome work. Silence blessed him again until he had click thundered across the room. War Journal, Entry 11. The voice was deep and completely devoid of all regret. Mike hadn't really paid much attention at school, but he remembered the robotic way scientists talked in those videos the teachers played when they were too bored to instruct the children. This was that voice. A meeting between the Magia and the Irish, scumbags trying to deal in weapons and heroin. The first one to kill children in Africa, the second to kill children in America. Made sure they cannot kill any more. Cooley is not in sight, nor are any of Silvermane's capos. No valuable intel can be taken now. A damn shame. But it isn't a wasted night, the air feels cleaner now. Footsteps disturbed the silence once again, leaving the area. Mike released the air he'd been holding in, cursing himself for not keeping the silence. He laid in place for a few more minutes until he finally allowed himself to get up. He looked at the bloody scene once again, knowing his life would be reduced to dead silence if he stayed in place any longer. With trembling fingers, he reached inside his coat for a small snub-nosed revolver, an amulet that gave his sword a small amount of comfort. He looked at the door where he'd heard the man enter and stepped back from it, searching for another exit while always keeping guard for the demon to emerge once again from the underworld's dilapidated entrance. Mike allowed himself to breathe easier as the distance between him and the bodies increased, and he was satisfied enough to finally turn his gaze away into his destination. A black and muscular wall. Mike fell on his back, his precious weapon slipping from his fingers. He heard it skip away in front of him. When he tried to search for it, he saw the monster standing between him and escape. The man's eyes were cold. Mike didn't think he would ever feel anything as cold until he felt the barrel of a gun between his eyes. The only warmth he felt started between his legs and dribbled all the way to the floor, until the air made it cold as well. "See, come on, man. I didn't do nothing. I don't even know these clowns," he stuttered, unable to look at the man's face any further. "I'm just a messenger." His eyes trailed downwards, towards his chest, when finally noticed a symbol that contrasted against the black outfit. A white skull. The man clicked on the recorder again and placed it in front of his mouth. No survivors. Time condensed into a single moment. Mike managed to see the gun's hammer slam and the barrel retract. He even managed to feel something heavy press into his forehead. He heard one last crack that blew at his eardrums, then an endless silence reigned once more. An inked brush met a large piece of parchment, and for what felt like hours, that was the only sound that reverberated through the dark room. His teacher floated silently around him, studying his work with a critical eye. Naruto tried to forget he was there, concentrating only on his work. Distracted for a moment, he looked at his progress and almost broke into a grin. There were definitely no errors. A gentle and yet annoying tap on his shoulder made him grit his teeth. "What now?" Naruto asked, not bothering to hide his irritation. The sage touched a part of the work with his staff. "There. Your mind wandered for a few seconds. A wolf that howls his victories before finishing off his prey is destined to starve. Start from the beginning. It's only slightly longer than. Slightly is enough. Start from the beginning." Naruto grumbled, knowing that it was the only resistance he could muster. He unrolled more of the endless scroll and inked his brush again. Why was he doing all this? Sure, he could store things into scrolls, but what he really wanted was to learn some new jutsu. Clones and the Rasengan could only take him so far, and mind powers placed a serious toll on his head. He remembered dark auburn hair streaked with white. Rogue, his friend, that's why he was doing this. With a newfound resolve, he placed the brush on the paper and started again. "You have been improving," said Hagoromo, much to Naruto's surprise. It was not often that the old man praised anything. "And you do not complain as before." "Only because I know you won't give answers," replied Naruto. Many times, he had asked the sage about his heritage, and many times he had been told that he was not ready to know. Even though he had come close to dying when fighting against Magneto, the old man still refused to teach him new techniques. "How are you progressing with the mystical palm?" Naruto laid down his brush and concentrated on one hand, gritting his teeth until a green energy came to life. He held it for a few seconds, but it began to flicker like a dying fire until it faded away, despite his greatest efforts. "I told you it isn't for me. Medicine is the hardest of professions. It will take more than the few months you've been practicing to master that technique." The blonde returned to his work without saying a word. The mystical palm was even harder to learn than the Rasengan, and it was far less useful to him. He wouldn't need to worry about his friends getting injured if he was strong enough to prevent any harm from coming at them anyway. "Even if you are the strongest man in the universe, your loved ones will still get injured," said the sage. "Are you reading my mind again, old man? That's private stuff. I didn't need to read your mind to know what you were thinking. I will say again that I will not teach you the means to take life without you first appreciating how to save them." Naruto knew better than to argue with the old man after so many sessions with him. It wasn't all bad, especially when learning seals. It was something he'd taken to almost immediately. Why hadn't the academy included Fuinjutsu as a regular class? He would have aced it. The old sage cleared his throat. "You have settled in this land well. A leaf can only fly so far before it starts to grow roots." Naruto frowned. "What do you mean?" "It means that mere fondness of this place may grow into something more permanent." It was that uncomfortable subject again, the one that made him feel like a traitor to his friends, his village, his dream. He had learned to ignore it. It was easy thanks to Kitty being there to make him forget. "I took an oath, one that ends only in my death. There's still so many promises I have to keep." "Not anymore. There is nothing you can do right now. I'm a shinobi of Konoha." "When was the last time you wore your headband?" Hagoromo replied sharply. Naruto's response died in his throat. When he arrived, he'd worn the headband daily. That stopped when Professor Xavier told him to not wear it in public so that he didn't draw attention to himself, especially since he'd been seen with it when he first arrived. Later, Jean made a positive comment about his forehead and he slowly stopped reaching for it every day, and it slowly made its way to the bottom of Naruto's drawer. That doesn't mean anything, replied Naruto. My dream has never changed. I will become Hokage one day. And would you be so willing to leave what you have built here behind? Naruto didn't respond immediately. Less than a year had passed and yet so much had been built. He had new comrades and friends, as strong as the ones he'd built back home, and he had a girlfriend, something he'd never imagined he'd have back home. At times, he had wished he'd never gotten close to new people. But would he deny himself the pleasure? Even had he known back then that this would happen. He had promised Sakura that he'd bring Sasuke back, and he had promised everyone that he would become Hokage. But, he had also promised to be there for his new friends. He had promised to find a solution for Rogue's problems, and he had promised Emma to free her from Wilson Fisk. So many promises he had made. Could he fulfill them all? I don't want to choose. Alas, fortune favors you. 'Tis not a choice you need not make yet, and if fortune continues to favor you, it may not be a decision you will need to make in the future, said Hagoromo, turning away from him and into the darkness. At this moment, however, you have another test. Naruto opened his eyes to the blaring alarm. Groaning, he reached for his side and was surprised at the lack of warmth. A look confirmed that Kitty wasn't there. She probably had spent the entire night studying and slept on her desk again. At breakfast, almost everybody that had applied for the tests was nervous. In contrast, those who had not applied for the scholarship tests were excited at the last day of school before the 2 weeks break. Bobby and Sam were already talking about going to a game in the city. Did you hear? New principal arrived, said Kurt with a grin. Let's hope this one isn't some agent for Magneto, yeah. He looked at Kitty. What is it, Katsuchan? Your eyelids are bluer than my fur. Kitty rubbed her temples. Spending the last week studying while being fueled on coffee will do that to you. You wouldn't know since you didn't take this scholarship seriously, nor any of our schoolwork, for that matter. She smiled at Naruto. At least we managed to convince one boy to think about his future. Kurt gave a sheepish shrug. I already told you that my path isn't with a college. It's not my passion anyway. What is your passion? Asked Dororo. He twirled with his scrambled eggs. The X-Men for the moment, it's my home and the only thing I've felt passionate about. If that doesn't work out, there's one thing. Back at home, everybody shunned me, even the orphanages. All except for one place, an old priest at the church, and the nuns that attended it. He always helped everybody, no matter who they were or where they came from. Gave me this as a farewell present. He showed them the cross he always wore around his neck. I always wanted to be someone like that. All in due time. Sometimes, our path will not reveal itself until it's time, declared Professor Xavier just before the clock struck a timer. Speaking of time, you don't want to be late today. When they arrived at school, the same dichotomy stood. Most were already talking about their plans for the next 2 weeks, but the ones that had the tests only paid attention to their texts, eyes scanning furtively for last-minute knowledge, only looking away when the bell rang. Instead of going to their classrooms, the teachers herded the students to the basketball court for an assembly. The chatter died when a professionally dressed young woman took the podium. She stood prim and regal, with hair that was black as night and pale skin. Her eyes were hidden by a pair of red sunglasses. That a relative, Summers, joked one of the students, prompting a few laughs. The woman cleared her throat. Good morning, students. I am your new principal, Sage Thompson. I hope to be of service to you like Principal Darkholme was. I know you have tests now, so I will not take any more of your time. I wish you the best. Not very talkative, is she? Commented Kitty. I prefer that over a shapeshifter spying on us, replied Jean. Or yelling at us for being a minute late, added Kurt. 1 minute. All right, 5, maybe 10. The bell rang once again and everyone who was taking the exams took a long, collective breath. Naruto joined Jean, Kitty, Ororo, Rogue, and Scott as they were taken to several empty classrooms. Inside were not their usual teachers, but specialized observers wearing the Stark logo. Each student had a reserved seat and only once everyone was seated did the observers unlock the briefcases containing the tests. When he first decided to take the tests, Naruto only did so because Jean and Kitty had persuaded him to do so. He didn't really care if he got the scholarship or not. He didn't know what to study, and even if he would study. But it wasn't just for him that he took it. It was for Hank McCoy, who always told him that he could go far in higher education. It was for Kitty, who wanted to go to college with him. It was for Jean, who always gushed about his potential. So Naruto studied harder than he'd ever done before, despite wanting to do other things, all for today. With pencil in hand, Naruto opened the test and started to answer. The exams took the entire afternoon, with only 2 small breaks in between to eat lunch and go on bathroom breaks. Inside the classrooms, nothing but the tapping of calculators, scribbling of pencils, and the ticking of the clock could be heard. The questions were easy at first, but got harder as it went on. It was divided into several sections, each one contained a subject they had seen in class. Naruto managed to solve them quickly. He wouldn't have been able to do it without the knowledge of his clones. By the time the final section was over, his head was hurting. The final bell was greeted with excited cheers from the students in regular classes as they poured out of the entrance, eager to get their break started. The test takers breathed a sigh of relief and were the last to leave, all energy spent. "How did it go?" asked Jean as they all met at the gates after everyone had gone. Groaned Kitty as she stretched her arms. "I feel like I'm going to collapse. But other than that, I think I did fine. I just hope that it's enough." Rogue yawned. "And, I just hope it's worth it. Y'all were the ones that roped me into it. Hey, college girl, who would have thought about it?" "I definitely got it," said Naruto once Jean's gaze turned on him. "That's great to hear," responded Aurora. Scott nodded. "All right. Time to go back to the institute. If you're up for it, I think we should all have a training sess." 4 pairs of tired eyes glowered at him. "Oh, right. Sleep. I'm up for training," said Naruto. "That stamina, I swear," muttered Kitty, jumping behind his back and grabbing a hold of his neck. I need to get to bed, or I'm sleeping on you." "You already sleep on me every night," whispered Naruto. Good point," giggled Kitty. As soon as lunch at the institute was done, Kitty and Rogue went back to their room. There was no training session that day. Aurora was spent, and Logan was still absent from that long trip he said he was taking. Emma had told him that there were no targets that night. Even if there were, Peter would also be too tired from the tests. Naruto lay down on his bed and looked at the ceiling. There was nothing for him to do. 2 weeks, what was he going to do for 2 weeks? Just practice with what the old man told me, I guess. He looked at his hand and concentrated his chakra until it took a green hue. It was like trying to guide a massive flood into a small, tranquil stream. At first it was not so hard, but maintaining it for more than a few seconds was impossible. Unable to stop the torrent anymore, he let go of his chakra control and the green chakra on his hand disappeared. Grunting, he stood up and went to his desk, completely filled with books that he'd been studying. He quickly started to take the books off and summoned a clone to take back the ones that belonged in the institute library. At the bottom of the pile were not books, but scrolls. Naruto looked at the array he was doing before the intensive study regime. It was a seal to store chakra, usually a fairly easy seal, but this one was modified so that it let out a steady, almost minuscule level of chakra constantly. It was a seal he was making for Rogue, so that her body was layered with an invisible coating of chakra to prevent her powers from harming others when she wasn't fighting. Naruto grinned and retrieved his brushes and ink, eager to continue his work. The array for storing chakra was done, but the problem started after that. How much chakra was needed for Rogue to safely touch people? How did he maintain a steady output of chakra without it going out of control? How much chakra could he place at a time? He could easily deactivate the seal, but what about Rogue? If a fight started and she couldn't use her powers, it would be trouble. All of those questions were fixed on his mind as he spent the next few hours working on the seal. Dozens of failures followed. Either the chakra stopped flowing or it flowed too much, or worse, didn't flow at all. He tried it on himself first, just to make sure it wouldn't hurt him. Finally, after hours of work, he looked at his latest design and stored some of his chakra. Activating his eyes, he activated the seal, and was rewarded with the sight of a steady release of gentle chakra. Feeling a wave of energy rush through him, he grabbed his ink and brush and ran to the room next to his, frantically knocking on the door. There were a couple of voices at the other side and the door was soon opened to the sight of an annoyed Rogue, with Kitty sitting on her bed. "What is it?" Rogue asked, not looking annoyed anymore, but absolutely exhausted. "Take off your shirt," he blurted out excitedly. Rogue's green eyes forgot their fatigue as they widened. What?" she stuttered, her cheeks turning pink. "Naruto," yelled Kitty. Naruto held up his large scroll and showed them the seal he'd been working on. "I think I finally got it." They gave him confused looks. "If this works out, it could be a solution for you to control your powers." Rogue widened her eyes again and looked at the seal. "What do you mean? How would this help me?" He grinned. Hee, I think that the reason why you can touch me is that my chakra naturally creates a shield all over my body," he said excitedly. She nodded. "All right, and how is that supposed to help?" Naruto showed the scroll again. "I've been working on my fuinjutsu. I figured that if I can store some of my chakra into a seal and place it on your body, it can constantly release chakra automatically." He exposed his stomach and channeled chakra for his seal to appear. "Sorta like mine." Rogue didn't think too much after that. "All right." She grabbed the hem of her shirt and pulled it over her head, leaving her only with a black bra. "What do you want me to do?" "Just lay down," instructed Naruto and grabbed his supplies. Rogue slowly lay herself on the bed while Kitty pushed forward a table so he could put down his ink and brush. Naruto dipped his brush into the pot of ink and slowly brought the tip to Rogue's stomach. She gasped and slightly shivered. Naruto stopped his work. Only after a reassuring nod did he continue. Working on a human body was far harder than in a scroll. For one thing, it was not a completely flat surface despite Rogue's toned stomach, and even though she was trying to keep still, there were still slight uncontrollable movements when she took a breath or shivered due to the cold of the ink. All of that took more time than he was used to, and far more concentration. "These inks ain't permanent, right?" asked Rogue as she lightly tilted her head to see his work. "Not to look at a gift horse in the mouth or anything." Shaking his head, Naruto showed his stomach and briefly passed chakra over it to show his own seal. "They disappear if chakra is not used. The ink will fade but the seal will remain etched on your skin until I remove it or it stops working." A curious Kitty stood beside him as he continued working. "So these are those seals you've been staying up late for? I thought they were for storing things." "Storing, protection, defending, attacking, enhancing, there's a lot of things you can do with seals. They weren't taught at the academy back home. But they really should have. They're easier than anything I was taught in regular classes." "That's easy. I can't understand any of it. Are you sure you're not some seal genius or something?" Naruto laughed bitterly. "I was always the dead last back in the academy. It's only after going to school here that I started being good at studying." He stopped with a final swipe of ink near Rogue's chest. "All right, the moment of truth." His hands hovered above her navel and steadily poured chakra on the seal, stopping when it glowed a green color. "Done. You can stand up now." "Is that it?" asked Rogue as she went over to the mirror to see the array of seals. "I don't feel any different." "There's only one way to find out." Naruto turned towards Kitty. "Why don't you try giving her a little touch?" "What?" Naruto raised his hands. "Just enough to see if it works. One small tap isn't going to do much harm." Kitty sighed and looked at Rogue, holding out her hand. "All right, but you better not lay me out." Rogue nervously undid the glove of her right hand, flexing her bare fingers. Both approached their trembling hands as if each other was on fire. They stopped just as they were about to touch, only going further after looking eye to eye. Finally, both fingers met, at first a small tap, nothing. With widened eyes, both girls tapped each other again, nothing once more. Next, they touched their palms together but the result was the same. Rogue went further and passed her hand along Kitty's entire arm. "Oh my god," cried Kitty as she launched herself on Rogue with a full-bodied hug. "I'm so happy for you." Dunno what to say," muttered a still wide-eyed Rogue. She stopped staring at her hands to look into Naruto's eyes. "Thank you. Ah, can't believe that. Suddenly, the seal started to glow again, brighter each second until it was blinding to the eye. A wave of blue chakra burst from her body, leaving the seal back in the color of its black ink. Shaken, Rogue stood up and looked at her body for any harm but found none. Naruto made sure that it was completely harmless. She looked at Kitty again and both brought their hands together. This time, it was different. They withdrew their fingers as soon as they met, each of them shuddering. Everybody's smile dropped. Naruto grit his teeth. He was sure that it was going to work this time. Why did the chakra escape? Where was the mistake? Or did he have to add more to it to make it permanent? Sorry, he said, hanging his head in shame. I thought this was it. I was completely sure that it would work. A hand grabbed his chin and guided him to Rogue's eyes. It did work. Ah, didn't know that you were working on this, and Ah never asked you. But still, thank you for everything. Naruto nodded. She was right. It had worked, even if for just a moment. The moment just needed to be made longer, no matter how much time and effort it took. He grabbed the brush with a newfound vigor and looked at Rogue. It didn't work this time, but I promise that I'll make it work one day. Believe it. She gave him a slight smile. Don't lose your sleep over it. I've gotten used to it. Ain't gonna make you waste your vacation on my problems. Naruto grinned and returned to his room, fully intent on using his new available time to finally fulfill his promise. Alright, that's all for today. Tired sighs of relief echoed through the dance hall, even from Kitty herself. Usually, she would finish dance classes wishing for more. That would have been the case if this class had been in Bayville, but she was no longer there. Now, she was with her new, absolute slave driver dance instructor. It had only been a couple of days since the routine dance recital in Bayville. As expected, Kitty had landed the main role. Little did she know that in the crowd was one of the most illustrious figures in the world of dancing. When she was done and Naruto had picked her up for the follow-up date, the two were intercepted by a young, dark-skinned woman named Stevie Hunter. Kitty had heard the name before. A famous dancer that had unfortunately sustained an accident that left her unable to perform professionally, but her expertise was such that she founded her own academy to train the newer generations. Her father made good money from his small bank, but even she knew that an apprenticeship at Stevie Hunter's dance academy would be far too steep for someone like her. So she had been completely elated when Stevie had offered to train her at a discounted price due to her talent, enough for her to afford it. A call to her father had solidified the deal and that was it. Goodbye rookie Bayville classes, hello exclusive dance academy in the middle of Manhattan. With exhausted groans, all of the students walked out of the dancing hall and into the showers. The hot water cleansed Kitty's clammy skin from the cold sweat. She couldn't be more thankful for spring after being cold for so long. Miss Hunter lives up to her reputation, said a voice to her right. Kitty turned to see the long red hair and blue eyes of her new friend. Before she had left her small town, Kitty never believed she would see someone as beautiful as Mary Jane. She'd seen movies, to be sure, but always assumed that the makeup artists and special effects enhanced the looks. It was only after she arrived in the institute that she had seen the stunning beauty of Jean, Aurora, and even Rogue. Unlike the pretty girls she'd had the displeasure of meeting back in Deerfield, Mary Jane was actually nice. The redhead never frowned, she always had a smile even when she was briefly slighted for her humble background. Her revenge was to show up every girl with a stunning dance. A girl that beautiful could never be sad. Oof, glad that's over with. I usually don't mind a little workout, said another voice to her left. Kitty turned around to see a girl around her height. When she first met Janet Van Dyne, she was turned off by the rich dilettante's comments. By the end of their second class, however, Kitty realized that Janet didn't mean any harm, but her lofty upbringing constantly made her ignorant of the economic limitations of other girls. The same could not be said by the other wealthy girls in the class, who liked to flaunt their expensive equipment in front of the dancers with grants such as Kitty and Mary Jane. Janet and Felicia, on the other hand, had willingly befriended them despite being mocked by the rich girls. Total jerks. Thinking of quitting already. And here I thought you were made of sterner stuff, Jan. Felicia Hardy was another beauty. Taller than all of her new friends, with platinum blonde hair and green eyes like Rogue and Jean Grey. She was also the most athletic out of all of them, even more so than Kitty herself, and with a stamina that was only surpassed by Naruto and Logan. She had barely broken a sweat throughout the intensive first class. "Oh, you wish. I may not be as insane as you, but a girl has to keep her figure," responded Janet with a smirk. "And Ms. Hunter told me she will teach us some dances that make the boys go wild." "So that's where your mind is at," teased Felicia. "Don't let the nuns hear you saying that. They're already writing you for those maelstrom drawings." Janet huffed. "If the nuns made all the rules, I'd be flogged for exposing my bare ankles, and it's starting to get too hot for the uniform. I don't feel like being a prude for the rest of my life." Felicia grinned. "Ah, Miss Van Dyne is starting to grow up, and all it took was a kidnapping." She tugged at her bra with a frown. "And you're not the only one growing up. I need an upgrade. Wanna go shopping tomorrow?" "Every day is great for shopping, but not tomorrow. Me and the rest of the club are going to protest the Daily Bugle for telling all those slanderous lies about the world's greatest hero," responded Janet. If there was one thing Janet obsessed over even more than shopping, it was the maelstrom. Kitty knew that Naruto had saved her and Felicia during the attack on Stark Tower, and ever since that day, Janet had used her resources to form the Maelstrom Fan Club, of which she proudly considered herself the first card-carrying member and leader of. When she said card-carrying, she meant it literally. Janet had little restraint at flashing it around with the coveted first number. Apparently they were up to 1,000 now. And that was only the beginning. Maelstrom bags, notebooks, pendants, stickers, and even a Maelstrom plushie. An actual plushie. Felicia turned her eyes towards her. "And what about you, kitty cat? Fancy going for a little spree?" "I'd totally go with you any other day, but I have plans with." Murmurs erupted from the wealthy girls. Kitty turned her gaze to see the reason and she immediately grinned. Naruto stood uncomfortably in the waiting hall, awkwardly peeking into the dancing room, a red rose in hand. Grinning widely, she strode confidently to her boyfriend, seeing his face brighten up once he caught sight of her. Taking the rose in one hand, she stood on her toes to give him a kiss, brief but clear enough for everyone to realize their relationship. From the corner of her eye, she saw some of the girls looking at her with goggled eyes and open mouths. A surge of confidence welled inside her. "Oh yeah, money can't get you this. It's all charm. Hey, handsome, thanks for coming all the way down for me. Hey, pretty kitty, you know I'd never leave you to walk alone. Ready to go back to the institute. I think Aurora left you some grilled fish in the fridge." Kitty shook her head and took his hand. "I know that I should be watching out for carbs and all, but after the week we've had, totally need a chicken parm, and you probably need around 4. Her boyfriend grinned sheepishly and nodded. "Do any of your friends want to come?" Felicia strode forward with a mischievous smile. "Yeah, pretty kitty, don't you want to introduce us?" Now it was her turn to look sheepish. "Yeah, this is my boyfriend, Naruto Uzumaki. Naruto, these are my new friends, Felicia Hardy, Janet Van Dyne, and Mary Jan." "Hey, MJ," greeted Naruto. "Hey, yourself," replied Mary Jane, showing her pearly white teeth with a small smile. "You seem to keep appearing in my life, Tiger. Don't you find it strange?" Kitty looked at both of them. "You know each other?" "Yeah," replied Naruto with a grin. "We met over at Stark Tower, before the, well you know." Janet closed her eyes and shivered. "It was the most frightening moment of my life. When they took me, I thought I was going to die." She looked down for only the briefest moment, and suddenly broke into a smile. "Thankfully the maelstrom saved us, didn't he, Felicia? With your daily reminder, how could I forget?" Felicia grinned and thrust her hand towards Naruto. "Nice to finally put a face to the name. Kitty Cat hasn't stopped talking about her boyfriend since we met. Name's Felicia. If you're looking for a specialist in art, jewels, antiques, or anything that costs an arm and a leg, just look for the name, Hardy." "Yeah, nice to meet you," Naruto said nervously. A black sedan with tinted windows rolled near the entrance, stopping only to let a burly man in a suit and glasses step out. "That's me," chirped Janet with a grin. She took out a pen and paper and wrote down a number before giving it to Kitty. "Give me a call if you want to go shopping. See you next time." Another vehicle with tinted windows came for Felicia. With a smirk she turned to them. "See you around," she said as she elegantly strode to the door a short but muscular man opened. Naruto didn't stop looking until the black SUV was swallowed by night. No car came from Mary Jane. Offering a pearly-toothed grin, she waved at them, specifically at Naruto. "You can call good ol' Mary Jane anytime you want. Though, with how we tend to meet unexpectedly, I don't think that's necessary." Naruto put up his hands. "I swear it's all a coincidence." Kitty pursed her lips. "How many times have these two seen each other now? Do you want us to take you home? It's dangerous out there." Now, I already told you I can look out for myself." She looked at Kitty, as seriously as Mary Jane could look. "Besides, it's rude to be a third wheel. Have fun." Before either of them could say anything, she had already sprinted to the other side of the street and disappeared into the subway entrance. Kitty grabbed Naruto's arm. "Ready to go." Naruto wordlessly looked around the mostly empty streets. Crossing his fingers, he made a clone that instantly transformed into a random passerby and just as quickly sped after Mary Jane. "Let's go," he said finally. "Most girls don't appreciate being followed," she stated dryly. "It's just until she gets home. It'll dispel itself after that," he assured her. Even so, she felt her stomach twirl a little but paid it little mind. "It's hunger," she told herself. The discomfort ended as soon as she felt fingers on her hair. Kitty had rarely been confident about her hair. It wasn't as striking as Mary Jane's or Jean's red, not as pure as Aurora or Felicia's white, not even as pretty as Janet or Rogue's auburn. She also preferred it straight, but her natural curls formed when she didn't take care of it regularly. That didn't seem to matter to Naruto. He could never keep his hands off of it. With her worries sated for the moment, Kitty felt her playful side come up. She went behind her boyfriend and jumped on his back. "You know what? I'm not all that tired. All work and no play makes Kitty a dull girl. Let's have some fun." He grinned. "Where do you want to go, pretty kitty?" Kitty looked around until she found a giant Ferris wheel. She remembered her parents taking her to the county fairs when she was a child, and as she became older, the rides seemed smaller. The size of this one made her remember still being 6 years old. They didn't make them that big in Deerfield. Knowing what was coming next, she held on to his neck as he flashed into a rooftop and began jumping towards their destination, only slowing down when they got near the entrance. Before she got her purse out, Naruto had already paid for both of their tickets. After he'd done it on so many dates, she knew better than to protest. "Where do you want to go?" asked Naruto. She took a look around at the attractions. There were the rides for kids that she enjoyed once, and the adrenaline-pumping ones she'd been too young to get into, but given how much she rode on Naruto's back and the general excitement of mutant life, they seemed almost mundane. "Come here, come all. First to get all targets wins the big prize." Their heads were drawn to the man in the shooting gallery. He looked directly at Naruto. "You have the look of a good shooter, young man." "Oh, you have no idea." Kitty giggled as Naruto walked up to the man and paid for the gun and some pellets. Several seconds and a few repetitive tinkling sounds later, all of the metal targets were down, along with the jaws of the man and all the spectators. The man chuckled nervously and went for the giant bear at the center of the gallery. "Didn't think this would go so early in the evening." "Wait," she interrupted, looking at the other prizes until her eyes settled on a small little stuffed toy. "The dragon," she decided with a grin. Visibly confused but nonetheless grateful, the man picked up the small purple dragon and gave it to her. "I didn't take you for the type that liked dragons," said Naruto, stuffing a handful of popcorn in his mouth. "Dragons can be cute," she retorted with a laugh. "That was amazing, by the way." He chuckled. "It's pretty easy. Just aim down the sight and pull the trigger. You don't even have to think about force or stability like with shuriken or kunai. Catching goldfish with a paper scooper, though. That's hard. Still, you've only been here for less than a year. How did you learn to shoot like that?" He made a smug grin, flashing his eyes red for a brief moment. "I get shot at fairly regularly. Some of those guys are pretty good." Kitty nodded but pursed her lips. Being the Maelstrom's girlfriend had been quite an experience. She obviously could not reveal his real identity to anyone aside from people in the institute, and sometimes he had to leave suddenly, especially at night, only to come back later smelling like dirt and gunpowder. Yet she never felt like she was dating two people at the same time, like it was portrayed in hero movies. Naruto is the maelstrom, and the maelstrom is Naruto. Anybody who knew the two could realize it. She knew she should be proud of him, and she totally was. But at the same time, Naruto's double life worried her. The memory of how easily he was willing to give up his life on Asteroid M never left her mind. He acted on impulses alone, noble as those were. A hero's girlfriend was supposed to be supportive, but how could she be expected to ignore the anxiety brewing in her stomach every time he left at night? "Let's get on the wheel," said Naruto, pointing at the biggest ride. "I want to see the city." Kitty giggled. "I would have thought that you'd be bored of heights by now, being able to fly and all." "I'm still new to flying, so I have to concentrate a lot on not losing my balance until I can get to Jean's level." There was no line to the Ferris wheel. They were actually the only people riding on it, in fact. Most of the children were not interested in the slow ride. Children had been more visible in the city in the last few months. Mothers were more willing to let them out thanks to recent nosedive in crime. All of it was thanks to Naruto's work. Naruto and his friends, of course. The wheel moved slowly, a contrast compared to most of the rides. She preferred it that way. "What are you doing on vacation?" she asked, resting her head on his shoulder. He shrugged. "Work. We're getting close to something big. I can feel it. Also, I need to keep working on the seal for Rogue, and have you ever thought about time? Rogue said that you don't need to spend all of your vacation working on it. Try to do something you like." "I am," replied Naruto. "I'm spending time with you." Kitty smiled. "I know that you have responsibilities, but just be careful, okay? For me?" "Yeah." He grinned and gave her a thumbs up. "Don't worry about it." She rested her head on his shoulder again, finally turning to see the city. It was filled with light and noise, and she didn't think she could ever get used to how busy it was compared to her home, but she still loved it, especially when she came with Naruto. It was filled with new friends, new challenges, and food. A rumbling erupted from her stomach. Red-faced, she remembered just how hungry she was. Pursing her lips, Kitty turned to Naruto. "It was fun and all, but could you get you a chicken parm?" "Yeah." He undid their belts and stood up. Kitty almost reflexively jumped on his back, wrapped her arms around his neck and held on tightly just as Naruto took to the skies. It was far more stable than his jumping, and made the rest of the rides in the fair look like a total bore. It was a hero girlfriend perk she could totally get behind. "Are you still helping the professor with that girl in the asylum you talked about?" asked Kitty as she took a big bite of her meal. The restaurant was one of her new favorites. Delicious and perfectly affordable, although the price mattered little since Naruto always insisted on paying. Naruto stopped eating his third meatball hero. "Wanda. Yeah, she's been getting better, at least I think she is. I can't imagine living in that place for over 5 years. Anybody would go completely insane going through what she's been through. I've tried to tell everyone in the hospital to give her a chance, but they won't let her go." Kitty pursed her lips when she saw the look in Naruto's eye. She had known him long enough to know he would never stand by when there was someone in need. It's the reason why he had become a vigilante in the first place. It was unbelievably sweet, but just as dangerous. "You can't save everyone," she said. "What you already do is more than enough." She grabbed hold of his hand. "But if you need help with anything, you know that I'm here for you." He looked at the table for a few seconds, deep in thought. His gaze snapped forward and he used both his hands to grab hers. "Are you sure that you can help me? As long as it's not something crazy." His head dropped a little. "I mean like, totally insane," she added. He looked at the waiter and ordered 2 big sandwiches for himself plus an order of pasta to go. After waiting for the food and paying, they went behind the restaurant to the alley where he stored the food into a seal and told her to grab hold of him again. Kitty felt herself growing more and more nervous by the minute. "What are you planning?" she finally asked just before they took flight. "I'll tell you when we get there," he replied and took to the night sky once again. They flew over the city until the lights turned into roads, grass and trees. They were going back upstate, but they passed over Salem Center and the Institute, following the roads until they reached a wooded area, occupied only by a set of dim lights in the middle of a small forest. Naruto finally made his descent. Salem Center Mental Health Institute, she silently whispered the words atop the front gate. Is this where? He nodded. And you're planning to? He nodded again. Are you planning to commit yourself? 'Cause this is totally crazy. I'm trying to do what is right. I know you are, but there are other ways of doing this. You're not going against criminals here, Naruto. This is a legally operated mental health institute. What you're planning to do goes beyond being a vigilante. You said that her powers are there trying to help her. Naruto shook his head. No, they're not. They're not doing anything with her. Wanda has nobody to help her. Not her parents, not her brother, not even the doctors want to help her, and she needs help. But they don't bother because they can't understand her. So they just force her to take pills all day, lock her and throw away the key to forget that she ever existed. Naruto. If the monster inside of me came out, would you also say that I deserve to be locked up forever? Kitty couldn't find it in herself to raise any more protests. Even if she did, they would be too half-hearted to convince anyone, let alone Naruto. All right, she said. There's a first for everything, including breaking the law. Naruto smiled and grabbed her hand, leading her to a part of the wall that was covered in darkness. She instinctively phased both of them to the other side, and again upon reaching the building's wall. They entered a dark storage room that smelled like it hadn't been disturbed since the building's foundation. Great. I knew that this room was abandoned, whispered Naruto. His red eyes shined even in the darkness. There is a guard walking around the halls, and we have to be careful about cameras. Let's go right. She gave a nod. Do you know where she is? No. They only let her out for the meeting rooms, but I've never seen where she sleeps. She tapped her chin. We should search for a ledger or something, otherwise we'll be running around the place all night and we'll probably get caught. There's a reception desk on the left, but I saw cameras the last time I was here. We'll just have to get rid of them without security noticing, said Naruto. So they had their plan. The following rooms on their left were filled with cabinets, the one beyond seemed to be a rest area of some sort with a fridge and 2 microwaves, and when they finally emerged from the rooms, they did so in a hall, with the reception Naruto mentioned at the very end, illuminated with a dim light. On its path was a series of security cameras. Wait, whispered Kitty when she saw Naruto about to charge at the first camera. Allow me. She approached the camera slowly, making sure there was not another one behind her, and phased through the wall, rising until she reached the top of the ceiling, and swiped her hand on the device. She smiled at the sound of the electronics dying inside the camera. She continued doing the same for the next few cameras, even when it was seemingly unnecessary. No guards were coming out to check the now destroyed surveillance equipment. Even the reception was completely unguarded, and Naruto said that the only staff on the floor were chatting near the exit. Wanda, 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 Naruto muttered as he started to check the ledger, Kitty keeping an eye for any guard Naruto might have missed with his special eyes. Got it. Wanda Maximoff. Let's go. The room was thankfully nearby, and she only needed to deactivate a couple more cameras until they reached a reinforced door. Nodding to Naruto, she slowly phased inside, deactivating one last camera before pulling him inside the room. It was completely undecorated, with only a metal table and chair, access to a small bathroom, and a bed, where a restrained figure rested. Wanda. Naruto whispered loudly and the girl woke with a violent jerk, stopped only by her restraints. Naruto. Is that you? She asked. What are you doing here? Kitty narrowed her eyes until she could focus them on the darkness. Naruto had been accurate about Wanda's looks, green eyes and auburn hair, slightly tall for her age, with pale skin from lack of sun. What he hadn't told her was that, despite the greasy hair and the sunken eyes, she was very pretty. They're always pretty. Every single one. A dark part of her wondered if Naruto would be this insistent on helping her if she was not pretty, or anyone else for that matter. Felicia was pretty, and so was Janet, and he was sending those clones after Mary Jane. How many times had he risked everything to help Jean and Aurora? How many more pretty women did he help out at night? Would he be so ready to help if they were not? Her thoughts stopped when she saw Wanda looking back at her. Kitty shook her head and savagely buried those thoughts. Of course he would help. That's who he was. He would always help, and so would she. Hey there, name's Kitty. Kitty pried, she whispered and slowly placed hand on Wanda's restrained arm. Don't freak out, alright. Green eyes looked at her inquisitively before widening as her body was phased out of the binding mechanism. What are you doing? She asked, looking back at the bed and door as if she expected guards to storm in and place her back any second. Naruto gave a single chuckle. I told you that I always keep my promises, one way or the other. Come on, he said, picking her up and nodding to Kitty, let's get out of here. Kitty grabbed onto his neck as he jumped to the ceiling. She closed her eyes and phased all three of them through the roof, letting out a breath in the still chilly air. Her body was getting tired now. Naruto wasted no time in taking to the sky, and though his flight was a little shaky when supporting three people, they still managed to get out of the literal woods with little trouble. Just as Kitty's eyes started to feel heavy, the trio saw the colonial-style architecture of the institute. Naruto did not land near the entrance, as he usually did, but near a small field that the school had been carefully constructing into a garden. After a full minute, Wanda let go of her tight grip and allowed her bare feet to settle on the grass. Despite the darkness, she could only stare at the sight with wide eyes and an open mouth. Her toes dug into the rich soil and her hands lightly traced over a freshly planted flower. A confusing sound erupted from her mouth that almost sounded like a cry if it hadn't been brimming with joy. Wanda looked at Naruto. Why did you bring me here? This is the institute. The one that me and the professor told you. It's where people like us come because we need help to control our powers. We're going to be helping you from today on. But what if you can't help me? What if they tell me that I need to go back? He placed a hand on Wanda's shoulder. I won't let them, he stated simply. He was dead serious. Wanda looked at the ground, eyes still doubting. She even pinched herself at one point as if she were dreaming. After years of being locked in a single building without leaving, Kitty imagined that it all must be surreal. Me and Aurora are still building the garden, and the library is closed right now, so no books. Naruto unrolled one of his scrolls and unsealed the food he stored earlier. But I did get you some pasta. That's at least half of my promise. The moment Wanda took her first bite, she pursed her trembling lips, but could not stop the tears rolling down her cheeks. Just minutes before she was a forsaken soul, completely devoid of love and purpose. Now, life was once again present in her eyes, now sparkling like emeralds. The look on Naruto's face said more than 1,000 conversations Kitty had in the past. He was smiling, not expecting anything back, just to help people. When one looked beyond his goofiness, they would see a young man that would not falter against any enemy, so long as he did what he was her boyfriend, the hero, Naruto Uzumaki. Nothing would ever change that. Because at the end of the day, being a hero felt good. Naruto took a deep breath as he looked at himself in the mirror. For some reason, Naruto felt the need to look proper every time he met with Emma. Not in the same way as with Kitty. He felt comfortable enough with his girlfriend to keep some of his style. But Emma was a mature woman, in many ways than one. Far younger and more refined than some of the older women that he knew back home. It was hard to compare Emma to Tsunade. Once he felt comfortable enough with his naturally spiky hair and his outfit, he walked towards the wooden door and he knocked on it. Doors open. Come in, came the regal voice from the other side. His nose immediately met the pleasant scent of incense and perfume that accompanied Emma's usual jasmine fragrance. The room, despite its small size, was richly furnished with a large mahogany table and leather furniture. Take a seat, darling, spoke Emma, who was busy near the small bar at the corner of the room. Want anything to drink? Just some water, he said, sitting on the expensive couch. Emma turned with a devious smirk. Come on, darling, you won't leave me to drink all alone, will you? She asked while sashaying to his seat and taking her place right next to him despite the spacious furniture. I'm under 21. That makes two of us. Really? Her eyes twitched at his blurted remark. Wincing, he remembered what he heard Jean say about women being sensitive about their age. One of those, tact, issues he'd been working on. It's just that you are very smart and mature compared to the other women I know. He said quickly. Her smirk swiftly returned. It should be clear by now that I'm much more than the common riff-raff, darling. She elegantly sipped on her drink. You're the same. I don't just bring any pedestrian off the street into my place. You have to be special for me to give you some attention. Every time he was around, Emma conjured a storm of feelings. He felt uncomfortable and excited when she got physically close, and she never hesitated to touch, or persuade him to touch her, despite the fact that he was not her strip club client anymore. Ego boosts came when she complimented him, which was often, even for the most minimal things, like his abilities, and even just existing. She was the most confusing woman Naruto had ever met. Naruto mumbled. You said you had new targets for me. I do, said Emma as she twirled her drink. But it's still early in the evening, isn't it? Take a breather. This place is safe. Not even Fisk knows of it. You can relax here, take a drink, even sleep a couple of hours if you want. Or, she smirked, you can keep me company. Naruto nodded, leaned back on the couch, and closed his eyes. Emma had such comfortable furniture, and such wonderful smells compared to the usual congested smell of the city. He once again smelled the jasmine scent, and the light incense, and the meat. He opened his eyes again to see Emma placing a plate in front of him, filled with a mouthwatering steak and potatoes. His stomach growled. Emma laughed. Well, if you don't want a drink, perhaps I can offer you a meal. Go on. Naruto grinned and grabbed the utensils. It took all of his willpower to not just shovel the entire piece into his gullet. Jean had already taught him table manners, and by Kami, Emma was a woman that deserved his most polite behavior. As soon as he bit into the meat, his mouth exploded with flavor. It was juicy and tender, and cooked to perfection. Without a doubt the best steak he had ever tasted in his life. This is amazing, he said as soon as his mouth was clear. It's Wagyu beef, darling. Although in the lower grade, I'm afraid. Usually I prefer to get the Kobe cut for my guests, but alas, it was not available. This sufficed for my tastes, but any lower and I wouldn't dare serve it to you. Only peasants eat below prime grade. He continued to eat the meal while Emma made idle chatter. That's always how it started. At times, Emma told him about herself. Not much, but for him to know that she was from Boston, and that she came from a wealthy family but ran away, and fell on hard times. That's why she had fallen under the control of Wilson Fisk. Don't you ever want to return to your family? Naruto asked as he was finishing the last bites. Emma shook her head. I know living without a family must have been hard, darling. But some families are not worth being born into. Sometimes, being around Emma was more comfortable than being around the girls of the institute. She always listened to him and, without knowing, he ended up spilling up more things to her than he intended. Already she knew about Konoha, the Hokages, and about Orochimaru. Last time, he was extremely close to telling her about the Kyuubi and the Akatsuki. Her finger traced his jaw, gently pulling his face towards her. You look like you're carrying the entire city on your back. Trouble in paradise. Naruto shook his head unconvincingly. It's about girls, isn't it? Naruto tried to give an excuse but he choked on his own words. How did you know? She smirked and twirled her drink. It's always about girls with boys your age, trust me. Men are incredible at many things, but it's always the fairer sex that vexes them. You can talk to me about it. I'm a bit of an authority on my gender. I don't really want to be a bother. She smiled. It's the least I can do for you helping me, darling. I'm a great listener, and I promise I won't tell anyone. I don't know where to start, he mumbled. How about your girlfriend, suggested Emma. Kitty, was it? He confirmed with a nod. What's happening? You can barely stop talking about her any time you come with me. I don't know, really. I think she doesn't like it when I go out at night, and she keeps telling me to concentrate on my studies. I mean, it's nice and all, but I'm a shinobi, fighting is what I'm supposed to use my skills for. I don't see myself settling down as a doctor or an engineer. Who's talking about settling down? She asked, waving her hand at him. You're still young and have your whole life ahead of you. Do you really think she's considering marriage? I don't think so, not at her age. Most women don't get married until after college these days. She's just worried about you. He looked at the ceiling. Back at home, shinobi marry quickly. Only the most powerful live past their 20s, and even most of those die off around their 40s, so you need to have enough kids to take your place before you're killed. It's part of our duty. Your home sounds like a dangerous place, commented Emma. Naruto nodded. But we accept the lifestyle. No shinobi dies of old age. Even the old man, the third Hokage, died before he could truly retire. The only one who didn't die in battle was the first, and it was because of a disease. And yet there must be some that are stronger than others, no. These Hokage are some of them. They all came from powerful clans, yes. Not all of them. The fourth Hokage didn't have a clan. He was an orphan of war, brought as a baby to the village. The first, second and fifth were of the Senju clan, and the old man was from the Sarutobi clan. Most of them come from powerful clans, though. Clans that must have some special abilities. Those special eyes you told me about, they are inherited, right? Naruto wondered if that was the case. My eyes, he started, are called the Sharingan. They came from an old clan in my village. How I got them, I don't know, but I remember how people looked at the Uchiha in fear and hatred, even more than me. Everyone always said they were a cursed clan. They all got killed by one of their own. She placed a hand on his shoulder and made him look at her again. People hate what they cannot understand, especially when it comes to power. Someone like you, who has a litany of gifts, is bound to be feared and hated, but also admired. He nodded, remembering his time in Konoha and how he slowly started to gain recognition despite his gift. It had only been one gift then, though. Now, he had several more, and he wondered if his new abilities would be an even bigger taboo than just the Kyuubi. Just as he was about to ask again for the targets and leave, Emma turned the conversation back to women. What about this other girl you told me about? The one you want to help? Rogue, was it? He nodded. Do you desire to grow closer to her? Of course, he responded swiftly. I wish to get closer to all my friends. Emma laughed. You know that's not what I mean, darling. Do you want to get closer to her? He held up his hands. No, not like that. I mean, I have a girlfriend. I don't want to cheat on her. This is all because I want to make her stop worrying about me. I wasn't talking about cheating, she said with a grin as she once again toyed with her drink. People are not all that different from animals. Have you ever thought of that? How close many of our behaviors are to our beastly cousins. I never really thought much about it. The animal world is not as forgiving as our own. Especially to those of lower stock. Nature is not kind to those that do not pass useful traits to their offspring, especially the males. Sometimes, it's better for the ones with better traits to live on and reproduce as much as possible. For the betterment of genes, of course. Genes. That seemed to be Emma's favorite word. Every time it came out of her lips it was with reverence, and a passionate fire would light up her blue eyes. She had already asked him a lot of questions in previous meetings. Questions about his heritage, and shared his disappointment when he could tell her nothing aside from likely relations to the Uchiha clan and, if the old geezer was to be believed, the Senju clan. These Senju and Uchiha clans. They were quite strong, I presume. He nodded, trying to remember the few times when he'd paid attention to Iruka's lessons. Those were the two clans that created our village. The first two Hokage were of the Senju clan and the Uchiha were powerful, even though pretty much everyone disliked and feared them except for other shinobi. They even had to live outside the village proper. Like the executioners of old, she mused. Men that were forged for gruesome tasks, yet were unquestionably necessary. He quickly channeled chakra into his eyes and turned it off just as quickly. Despite the Sharingan being stronger than when he first got it, he wanted to use it as little as possible. Each time he resorted to using them, the reality of being related to the Uchiha clan filled him with dread. He knew it was hypocritical, the clan being only one rung above him in the Konoha scale of social contempt, but it was nonetheless disturbing to believe that he and Sasuke had blood relations. Oh, those are the eyes, right? The Sharingan you talk about. Can I see it again, please? Naruto turned on his eyes again and watched as Emma studied him meticulously. The eyes always brought fascination even back in Konoha, and here it was no different. Phenomenal, absolutely phenomenal. You are special, indeed. You and those eyes. You also told me that you had stronger chakra than most. That was one of the things that the ones called Senju had, right? Naruto thought for a moment before shaking his head. No, not really. There's no reason to believe that I have Senju ancestors, and there are other shinobi that also use the Sharingan that aren't Uchiha. There's no Uzumaki clan to my knowledge. Of those two statements, the first one was something that he believed. The old man was the only one that told him about it, but he would think that if he was honestly related to the first Hokage, he would have been able to quickly identify it. It's not like Konoha's founder's descendants could simply disappear. Granny Tsunade was partially famous for her blood relation to the first and second Hokages. As for the Uchiha, there was Ashinobi that used the Sharingan that was not an Uchiha, Kakashi-sensei, but he had most definitely gotten his eye from an actual Uchiha. It didn't take a genius to see that Kakashi wasn't a born user. He had a deep scar over the eye that housed his Sharingan, and his control over it wasn't as good as Sasuke's. In comparison, Naruto had it in both eyes, and he could activate and deactivate them at will. Nobody had done an eye transplant as far as he knew. Maybe when he was a baby, just as it had been done with the Kyuubi. Naruto just didn't like to think about it. Being the Jinchuriki of the Kyuubi no Kitsune was far less disturbing than being related to Konoha's cursed clan. Damn it, he was brooding again. Even so, you didn't get these gifts out of nowhere. Even your normal chakra abilities are magnificent. None of us can use them. She rested her chin on his shoulder. There's so much you can give to the world. You do know, it's only natural for creatures with exceptional genetic components to have an increased desire for propagation. Perhaps if your Senju and Uchiha clans didn't restrict themselves with conventional reproduction practices, they would still have survived. She finished her drink with a smile. Oh well, perhaps a lesson for the future. Naruto nodded absent-mindedly despite not really understanding what she was talking about. It's getting late and the others are waiting for me, he said, standing up. Humming in disappointment, Emma finished her drink and went to her desk for an envelope. Naruto noticed it was smaller than usual. These are the targets for tonight. He's noticed you now, darling, so you'll have to come to me every night for an update. Don't be surprised if some of these are decoys, either. He frowned. None of the other ones did these things when we started to hit them. There's a reason Wilson Fisk is in the place he is. You're dealing with a far cannier individual than the conglomeration of imbeciles you've faced until now. Stay safe, and remember that you can always come here if you run into any kind of trouble. He grinned and gave a thumbs up. I'll be back tomorrow. Thanks for everything. He put on his mask and walked off the room and the building. The alley he walked out to was unlit by design. This was Emma's hideout when she was not in Wilson Fisk's clutches and she wanted to keep it secret. As soon as he levitated into the air, he saw the countless lights of the city flashing in front of him. The cold had been slowly giving way to spring, though it was still chilly at night. The noise did not change. He landed on top of the rooftop and didn't have to wait long for a thudding noise to signal the arrival of Daredevil. Before either could say a word, Spider-Man landed gracefully on the metal vent. I got our targets for today, he said, pulling out the folder that Emma had given him. Do we divide them like last time or do we go in as a team? Daredevil stood silent, looking at the ground. What happened? Daredevil nodded towards Spider-Man. Show him. Fishing into his backpack, Spider-Man brought out a laptop and opened it. Naruto walked to him as the screen started to flash. Images started to pour forth showing a scene of savage violence. Bodies of once living men laid that were now nothing but heaps of flesh, with other images showing the casings of heavy-duty ammunition. Who were they? Magia and Irish mob. They were doing a big transaction of weapons and heroin before, well before that happened, responded Daredevil. Where did you get this? He asked Spider-Man. Remember that experiment we were working on? Managed to get through a back door to the police database. It's been a week and they still haven't realized it. So the two gangs killed each other off. Better than if they killed innocents, commented Naruto. No. Notice that none of the casings are beside the bodies. They didn't have time to pull out their weapons before they were killed. The suspect is the one we've talked about before. The media is calling him, the Punisher. He leaves no survivors, said Daredevil. Naruto nodded. So he's another vigilante like us. When do we present ourselves to him? He's not like us, snapped Daredevil. Naruto had never seen him this infuriated. We fight in the name of justice and leave the judgment to the rightful system. He's a murderer, plain and simple. But he got rid of the criminals. Isn't that the important part? It's true that we operate outside the law, but we are agents of justice, not the judge, jury and executioner. If a criminal deserves death, then he will get it after the proper process takes place. Sometimes, it'll be easier to kill them ourselves rather than giving them a chance for them to hurt more people in the future. You're right, it's easier. Too easy. We do not kill, no matter how bad it gets. Not to preserve their lives, but to ensure the survival of our souls. We may justify when we kill at first and our souls are tainted only once, but the next time, our judgment will be swift, and with less clarity, and so our souls will be less burdened each time, until sin becomes as easy as breathing, said Daredevil. Spider-Man kept on scrolling through the images, showing the faces of the dead criminals. He saw one last, and managed to recognize it despite the ruined forehead. "Stop," he yelled. "Go to the last one." The top of his face was almost unrecognizable, but he knew that lower half, the mouth, the nose, and the two moles on his cheek. The taste in his mouth turned to ash. "What is it? Did you know him?" Naruto nodded. "That was Mike, my informant. He hadn't spoken to him since Asteroid M. Many times he tried to find him, now he had, but it had been too late. He was the one that tipped us before my new informant. He must have been gathering information. Why did he get killed? You see, once killing becomes easy as breathing, innocents will bleed," whispered Daredevil. "We follow the criminals, find out their plans, and stop them, but we do not kill. Is that clear?" Spider-Man nodded quickly, Naruto slightly less so. "Good. Divide out targets and finish as quickly as possible." All three nodded and jumped from the building, off to another night on the job. "All right, honey. It's all over." "Not quite, I'm still breathing." Naruto stared at the screen in confusion as another laugh track boomed from the speakers. He didn't really understand the comedy from the black and white show on display, nor why the situation was so funny. He shrugged and continued watching. It wasn't really for him, but for Wanda, who broke into a smile at the spectacle. Professor Xavier hadn't really been surprised when he and Kitty brought Wanda from the asylum. The reprimand was half-hearted at best, and before an hour had passed, Wanda had been given her own room right next to Jean's. No mention of the mental health hospital had been made since that night. By the next day, most of the other students had welcomed the new student. Some eagerly, others less so, but she had been welcomed nonetheless. There hadn't been any tension until Jubilee had asked about Wanda's powers. That darkened Wanda's mood, and she could only respond that she didn't know much about her abilities, other than they were difficult to control. As such, she was currently excluded from mutant training. She wasn't bothered by it. There hadn't been any problems with Wanda's powers since her release, and she looked visibly happier when surrounded by her comforts: pasta, books, the institute grounds, and the bizarre old sitcoms that she watched. Oftentimes she was joined by other students, who must have seen the shows when they were younger. Naruto himself was never big into television, rare as they were back home. His memories were interrupted by two hands on his arm that started to pull him from his seat. Kitty was donning one of the bathing suits she'd bought back when he'd first taken her to the city. She'd been ecstatic to try out everything she couldn't wear in the cold climate. "Wanna come with, Wanda? I'll tell Rogue to lend you some of her swimsuits." Magneto's daughter just waved her hand, not looking away from her show. "I'll be fine. Have fun." Kitty shrugged and grinned at him, pulling him towards the wall and phasing both of them to the other side. The rays of light hit immediately pricked his skin. After a long winter filled with chilly winds and heavy snow, the spring sun had been welcomed with enthusiasm by everyone at the institute, even by Bobby Drake. Aurora made extra sure that they got clear skies for their first day of vacation. Vacation. That was a term that Naruto had yet to grasp. In Konoha there were only a few days off from the academy, and while shinobi could take days off, they were always meant to be ready for service if the Hokage ever called for them, no excuses. Vacations were only for the children that had been enrolled in civilian schools. It was a completely normal concept to the students of the Xavier Institute. Kitty was not the only one enjoying the warmer weather. Bobby Drake and Roberto were off in the field, accompanied by Sam. They had been discussing earlier the difference between football and American football. Most of the students were by the pool, even the normally reserved Dani was smiling as she took in the sun. There were some exceptions. Kurt genuinely preferred the cold due to his fur, Scott didn't care so long as he was training, and Rani. Clothe yourselves. Dinna why, feel any shame prancing round in underclothes like the antique heathens. 'Tis na, proper. Chastised a scandalized Rani, fully clothed from neck to toe despite the heat. In full view o' the men, no less. Nay, why, too, Dani. Och, the shame o' it. Jubilee grinned and wrapped an arm around the Scottish redhead. Underclothes. Calm down, Rani. We're just having some fun. Besides, how else is the skin going to get some color? She uncapped a bottle and poured some white liquid on her legs, spreading it with her hands. It was a fashion trend that was alien to Naruto. Tanning, they called it, using the sun to slightly darken the skin. But they needed sunscreen to protect the skin from burning too much. Women in Konoha did get some skin treatment, but nothing to change the color. Noble girls especially liked to keep it pale to distinguish themselves from working commoner girls. All around him, Naruto saw the girls helping each other. Ororo and Jean, Amara and Dani, Sean and Jubilee. Don't be such a sourpuss, Rani. Come and enjoy the sun. I'll lend you one of my swimsuits, offered Amara. Nay, I will not be dragged into this ritual o' sin, declared Rani as she picked up her skirts and stomped back to the mansion. That girl needs to lighten up. Ain't many guys that are turned on by scripture nowadays, muttered Rogue. Naruto, cooed Kitty, who was laying face down on a lounge chair and waving a bottle of sunscreen at him. Do my back, pretty please. Nodding, Naruto grabbed the bottle and slowly started to spread it over her back. Her skin was soft, but her muscles tense from training in dance classes. As he worked over her back, she let out a small moan. The sound made him kneel down so that others didn't notice his swimming trunks getting tighter in the front. It's almost like being at the beach. We should totally go in the summer, said Kitty with a grin. We could propose it as a trip with the school, or maybe we just go ourselves. What do you think? I'd love to, but I still need to work on. Come on. Heroes need vacations too, otherwise they'll go insane. The city isn't going to fall apart just because you're gone for like a week or two. Naruto smiled and nodded. I'll try. A voice coughed behind him. Mind if I borrow your boyfriend? Asked Rogue with her own bottle of sunscreen. Ain't got a partner to do my back. One that won't be spending the day in the hospital anyway. Kitty nodded, her eyes still closed. Sure, just don't forget to return him as soon as you're done. Well, if Kitty was alright with it. Rogue had set herself apart from the rest of the girls. It was rare for her to show this amount of skin, especially around other people that were showing just as little. A single mistake and one of the students would be spending the weekend at the infirmary. Grabbing the bottle of sunscreen, he got to work. Despite normally not showing anything below the neck, Rogue still made sure that her skin was soft. She shuddered at his touch, but he saw her smile. I've been working on it, the seal. There's still some things I need to do, and hopefully I'm able to find out a way to stabilize the chakra flow, but when I tried to find another solution, there was a problem with Naruto, she moaned. Don't worry about it. But I want you to have it as quickly as possible. There ain't many people I'll wanna touch right now. It ain't so bad once you start getting used to the precautions. Please, you don't have to go around worrying about me all day. Especially not when it's interfering with your life. Kitty told me I should relax, but she's right. You should relax. You ain't going to make much progress if all you do is work. I told you already that I can wait. Irene once told me that you shouldn't hate the calm, cause you may not like the storm. Enjoy yourself. He bit his lip and nodded, looking back at the institute and what he had built. You're right, I'll try to take it easy, he said, closing the bottle. Thanks. Yosh. He jumped from his seat and set his eyes on the pool. Why shouldn't he enjoy himself? Exams were over, Magneto was nowhere to be seen, nor Akatsuki and Orochimaru, and he didn't have the means to go back to Konoha. They even had the bad guys in the city running scared. Life has never been better. He sprinted towards the water and jumped several meters into the air, forming his body into a ball just as he was about to crash, sending water everywhere. It was nice and fresh thanks to the shining sun. Naruto. He heard Jean cry out when he surfaced and he could only grin in response. Really? What was the worst that could happen? Wesley had never seen his boss so angry. Granted, Wilson Fisk rarely showed any emotion in his ever-present poker face, but after spending so much time as his right-hand man, Wesley could say that he knew some of his boss's tendencies. It wasn't even the sudden spark of fury such as the time with Gutierrez where the reasons with his annoyance could be swiftly dealt with, but a slow and simmering anger that he couldn't take his frustrations out on. Everything started when Mike couldn't get into contact with the maelstrom. It hadn't angered Fisk as much as it had annoyed him that he had to rethink his plans. Mike promised his boss that he would get in touch with the annoying blonde and get him back to work, and in a few weeks, he managed to track down the vigilante, and that was the least of his revelations. The bad thing was that the blonde idiot, as Mike liked to call him, hadn't stayed put in the meantime. He had gotten a new informant apparently. One that, most worryingly, knew about his boss's operations. Since then, the maelstrom and his friends had been hitting them, and hitting them hard. The first domino to fall was a money laundering operation. After that, a nightclub, and later an insurance scam system they operated. Those were operations that had gone under the radar for long, posing partly as legitimate businesses, but now they were targets for the vigilantes. It was clear that they were being informed by one of Wilson Fisk's enemies. At least being hit meant that the Mexicans, Russians and the Mafia were dropping their suspicions. They were already being troubled enough by the new problem. Mike had promised Wilson Fisk that he would get in contact with the maelstrom, and in that mission, he had proved most resourceful. Now he was focused on figuring out who the new informant was, and to silence them if at all possible. Last communication had him tracking the movements of the Mafia and the Irish. Then Mike died. It hadn't been the maelstrom, nor his friends that had done it. They never killed. Beatings until they broke arms and legs. Sure, but not death. It had been a headache to threaten their arrested men into silence, even more to silence those that could not be trusted. The man however had killed everyone, the Irish, the Mafia, or Mike. The Punisher never showed mercy. Now Wilson Fisk was furious. He had lost his agent, his tools, and now he was steadily losing his business to the same tools he once controlled. His anger came in stages. The first was a gritting of teeth, followed by an impromptu sparring match with the men that had displeased him that week. It was what came after that bout of physical violence that was truly terrifying, the silence. The endless, absolute silence that heralded the utter ruination of Wilson Fisk's opponents. Just as they started to plan their moves, a new party had decided to show itself. "You called us here. What is it you want to show us?" asked Fisk. "No cigar this time. And why do you expect me to fund you?" The man was middle-aged and of average height, with dark hair and a pencil mustache. He approached Fisk with a smile. "Good to meet you, Mr. Fisk. I've heard much about you." "And I've heard nothing from you," responded Fisk. "That can be both a good thing or a bad thing. For your sake, I hope it's the former." "Ah, that's to be expected. Nobody looks at a shadow, no matter how imposing it may become. Even when it becomes more capable than its caster. And I have spent a lot of time as S.H.I.E.L.D.'s shadow." "Why would you leave S.H.I.E.L.D. to be your own man?" asked Fisk. The man chuckled. "I was loyal to S.H.I.E.L.D. in my own way, helping them design weapons to defend humanity, until they decided to protect the abominations they swore to annihilate." Fisk raised his eyebrow. "Yes, you know what I speak of, Mr. Fisk. The mutants that must be exterminated from the earth, who have caused you so much trouble already, and who at the moment have plans to do much worse to our kind." The man paced around the room. "So I decided to forge my own weapon, to save our kind from the monstrosities that plague our society, only S.H.I.E.L.D. decided to not fund my project. Worse still, they approached the mutants as friends. But I continued on my own, oh yes. On my own to save the world from them. A weapon designed to defeat the mutants. They still need to be completed, but with your financial backing." Lights flashed around the large room. Behind the man stood a dozen human-like machines made out of metal. Each stood at least 6 times the size of an average adult, colored in gray and purple. "I will unleash my sentinels on our enemies." Wilson Fisk reached into his pocket and pulled out a cigar. Wesley breathed in relief. No mess to clean up today. Oh, and pardon my manners, Mr. Fisk. The name is Trask. Bolivar Trask. The maelstrom, Naruto Uzumaki, was about to learn a painful lesson. Along with all his mutant friends. Bless me, Father, for I have sinned. Matt could hear Father Paul drawing in a deep breath, knowing it was for a sigh before it even came out. A man with your condition, coming as frequently as you do, carries either too much guilt or too many secrets, Matt Murdock. Or both. May I ask something of you, Father? You may. The Lord's own commandments are clear as the tablets they were written on. There is one in particular that is shared in both the laws of God and the laws of men. Thou shalt not kill. Now, the laws of men, the laws which I have spent my lives studying, make exceptions to this. If a man kills in self-defense, or if the state allows the use of force, it is permissible. I find myself wondering at times, if the Lord also permits such exceptions. Father Paul's teeth clenched for a moment. It is a question many of us have struggled to understand, Matt. Remember that the Bible is not the complete Word of God. The Israelites believed that killing was justified if a crime was committed, or if they were at war. The God of Abraham loved David even as he felled Goliath. Our Lord, as told by his Son, clarified that, thou shalt not kill, can be seen as, do not murder, to make a distinction. For out of the heart come evil intentions, murder, adultery, sexual immorality, theft, false witness, slander. The Book of Matthew, remembered Matt. Correct. I have always held the belief that human life must be respected, and we must do our best to love our neighbor. Yet when we find ourselves with no other option against those of wicked hearts, we may find ourselves forced to end a human life, and the Lord would judge us not guilty of evil. Is it justified, then, to use wickedness to punish the wicked? For the laws of God, perhaps. He did not write specifics. For that, we turn to the laws of men, some of which are inspired by the will of God. This is what you do in your work as a lawyer, Matt, learn, argue and reinforce those laws of men. But it is not in your power, or indeed in my power, to enforce the laws of God. But how are the laws of God enforced in this life? Father Paul was silent for almost a full minute. We cannot say for certain, but I can tell you what I have seen with my own eyes. These men, Matt, these murderers, these merchants of poison, these usurers and defilers, they never find a peaceful end. Part of me likes to think that this is the Lord's work, and the other part thinks that this is just the reaping of what they have sown. The Lord works in mysterious ways, recited Matt, the same line he had been told since childhood, even when his father had died. He does, confirmed Father Paul. And we indulge in pride when we think that we can fully know him. In the end, it is not our place to know where these evil men will end up, Matt. The Lord is the final judge, and he cannot be fooled. Matt sat for a moment of silence. Thank you, Father. He did not need to see to hear the confusion in the priest's voice. What for? You have not confessed your sins. Matt stood up and left the confessional booth. Forgive me, Father. I did not come for penance. What did you come for? To know what I need to do. Naruto's eyes snapped wide open, his body lurching forward despite the arms that were holding onto him. Groaning, he fell back onto the bed once he realized that everything had been a dream, though by that point, he had already woken up his sleeping companion. What happened? Kitty whispered tiredly, yawning and rubbing her eyes. I had a dream. But I don't think it was a dream, he responded. Was it because of Dani again? She asked in a low voice. Naruto shook his head. No, this is because of something different, he assured as he stood up. But speaking of Dani, I need to go and talk to her. Kitty sighed. I guess you do. Poor girl. Is it terrible for me to say that I've been sleeping way better these past couple of days? It wasn't a terrible thought, and it was doubtlessly one that the entire institute had been having. Even so, Professor Xavier's mission was explicit in that these were the people they were there to help. Dani had problems with her powers, and it was his duty to see to her. Because apparently, being second in command of the X-Men meant being first in command of the New Mutants. Naruto went down towards the kitchen, where food had already been placed in trays and some of the early risers were looking to indulge. By this point, everybody was used to the large amounts of food he could consume and didn't say anything when he added a little bit more in a lunchbox. With the sun already rising, he set out of the mansion, carrying a small bag with him, and entered the woods near the institute. The entire school had been suffering terrible nightmares for days, and it didn't take long for the professor to figure out that Dani Moonstar's unruly telepathic powers were behind it. It also didn't take long for Dani to perceive that others were looking at her with resentful eyes, even if they said nothing. So, 4 days ago, when Professor Xavier announced he was going for another visit to the Scottish island, Dani took to the forest. At first, everyone thought that Dani would be back, maybe at night to take a shower and sleep before waking up early and going back to the woods. In hindsight, they shouldn't have underestimated the young Cheyenne's survival skills. Not a single student had seen hide nor hair of her. Food, water, clothes, and shelter seemed to have been something Dani figured out on her own. As the unofficial team leader, it fell on Naruto to look after her. He started by going through the small trail that was used in hiking trips and kept a close eye for any disturbances, which came in the form of a snapped branch. His hunch was proven true when he saw several traps hidden on the path. Some were snares for small game while others were clearly meant for larger animals, or people. Hee. It's going to take more than a few traps to get the better of Konoha's #1 prankster, Dani-chan. Following the tracks and traps, it didn't take him long to find Dani's camp, strategically placed below some trees and near the bank of a small river. Despite only being gone for a week, she had already settled in. Dani would fit right in with any shinobi with her survival skills. A tent made with the hides of animals she had hunted housed several pelts and food, including dried meat, smoked fish, pemmican, and foraged fruits. If only we had her during the Chunin exams. But of the wayward mutant girl, there was no sign save for the still warm embers of the campfire. Naruto huffed at the idea of having to go on yet more searching. He could probably look at the ground for footprints or broken branches, even an experienced scout would leave those, or he could activate his eyes to look for life signatures among the animals of the forest. But of course, there were better alternatives. Dani, where are you? He climbed to the top of the highest tree and took another deep breath. Dani, I brought you some soap and shampoo. It didn't take long for a furious Danielle Moonstar to emerge from the bushes. She had taken back to wearing her traditional yellow garb, sewn with colorful decorations, and keeping half of her long hair in 2 braided ponytails while the rest of her tresses cascaded over her back, almost reaching her legs. In one hand she held her grandfather's bow and in the other several stone-tipped arrows she had crafted herself. You scared off the wild pig I was hunting, she growled. Naruto grinned. No need for more food when I brought you some, he said, waving at where he had placed the supplies. I can hunt my own food, thank you very much. You don't need me, and I don't need you. Fray. Naruto sat on the floor with his eyes closed into a frown. Dani-chan doesn't appreciate the things I do for her. She doesn't want food, clothes or water. He took out the shampoo and pouted. She doesn't even want this to prevent her long, pretty hair from becoming oily and smelly. Give me that. Naruto jumped up to the branch of a tree with a grin, dangling the bottle of shampoo. You can have it if you return with me to the institute. So that I can give everyone nightmares. She snarled. I'm not going to go back there to see resentful, baggy eyes staring at me during breakfast. Nobody resents you. You know that's a lie, Dani snapped. Naruto leapt down from the tree. All right, guess that's true, people want someone to blame when they're sleepy and grumpy. But that doesn't mean that you don't deserve to be there with us, especially when you want to get better at controlling your mind. Why do you care so much, anyway? Because you are part of my team, and I won't turn my back on you. Besides, if for some reason I cannot be with you guys when there's trouble, you're the best to take the lead. Dani raised an eyebrow. You really think I'm that kind of person? Me, who chose to isolate herself from others? Naruto nodded with a grin. The best leaders are often the reluctant ones. Whenever we did leadership exercises back at home, the ones that wanted to lead the most always turned into jerks. Sometimes the best leaders are the ones that don't want to lead. When the right time comes, we can find what we are capable of. Dani stood still, looking at the river. Maybe. I don't feel like going back to the institute just yet, but thanks for worrying about me. He laughed. Well, that's my job, he said while throwing the bottle of shampoo at her. And seriously, your hair is too pretty to let it get all oily. The girl stammered as he left without another word. He started to walk back towards the institute. Logan was gone, as well as the professor, but that wasn't all. Scott had already left, and Jean and Aurora would be going in a few hours as well. Even Kurt had taken a trip back to his church in Germany. Rogue had stayed, though. Of course, the same could not be said for the New Mutants. Everybody had decided to stay. There were those that didn't have anywhere else to go like Shion, Jubilee, Rani, and Dani, as well as those that thought that an adult-less institute was a lot more fun than any other vacation prospect. Aurora had already caught Bobby sneaking in a bottle of scotch and a girl the other day, and summoned a deluge in her fury. Then there was Wanda, who would rather go back to the asylum than search for her family. Thankfully, Kitty also decided to stay behind, declining an invitation with her parents to go to Hawaii. She had said that both of them deserved some alone time, but Naruto knew that Kitty loved beaches. True enough, she had begun pestering him to go with her to a closer, less expensive beach for a couple of days. He was so lucky to have her so close to him, even now. He could sense her coming, did so every time, and yet he still let her jump onto his back, latching her arms around his neck and kissing his cheek. Naruto grinned in return and grabbed her legs, carrying her back to the mansion. Sue, what are you doing today? Naruto grinned to himself. I need to go to the city. Dr. Richards wants another demonstration of my Rasengan with some new tool of his. Stark also called for me, but that's for later. I have some time in between. Kitty hummed sweetly into his ear. I got some allowance money that I want to spend. Why don't you come with us during that time? Maybe get something to eat after we're all done. Sure. There's this new place I've been wanting to check out. In fact, he had already made the reservation. The restaurant was pricier than normal and took a bite out of his savings, but it had a view that Kitty would want to take pictures in. She laughed as they reached the entrance. I'll go get ready, then. Be back in a few. Knowing that, a few, was Kitty speak for about an hour or two, Naruto walked into the game room where most of the team had gathered. Aurora had worried that without Professor Xavier or Logan, it would be chaos, but everyone was behaving appropriately, even Bobby. So much so that Scott had decided to enjoy his vacation with his long-lost brother while Jean and Aurora were going on a small hike. That meant that he would be officially in charge of the institute. I'm the adult now, hey. Jean had to force him out from sitting on Professor Xavier's desk. You're all ready? He asked Jean. The redhead was wearing a sports shirt and small shorts for the spring heat, along with some hiking boots. She was on her knees preparing her large backpack, filling it with essentials and half of the camping tent that she and Aurora would be sharing. Yep, just doing a double check for everything. Did you put extra batteries in? Yep. What about a hatchet? A survival knife? Jean laughed. We're just going for a small hike upstate, not the Appalachian Trail. We'll be back in a couple of days. She zipped up her back and stood up, giving him a grin. The real danger is mosquitoes. They're the size of pelicans this time of year. You sure you'll be all right? We can take care of ourselves, Mr. Hero. Naruto nodded and stood silently for a few seconds as Jean put on her bag with a small grunt. What's wrong? She asked. Sorry, it's just that I entered your mind last night, I think. Oh. Well, I did as well. It's one of those side effects of the link we have. I have seen your mind several times, in fact. A pit began to form in his stomach. He had a lot of memories of his life in Konoha, many of which he didn't want to show so easily. What do you know? She bit her lip. I know about the QB, of course, and about your village. I also know about your team, and about Haku and Gaara. Naruto looked down. Oh, yeah. Wanna talk about them? He nodded. It's strange. I find myself forgetting the faces of my friends, but I remember those two very clearly. Haku, he taught me a lot, even if he was technically my enemy. Before him, I only thought about fighting for my own glory. He taught me to fight for others to find strength, and he turned out to be right. He died so young, though, Jean said sadly. Is that what it's like in your world? Most shinobi die before we reach 30, confirmed Naruto. Kunoichi tend to retire first. Having children that can manipulate chakra to be future shinobi is also part of their duty. Male shinobi stay in service for much longer, especially if they're jonin. Most of us who survive into our 30s and 40s tend to be from the clans. 4 of our 5 Hokages came from clans. As for Gaara, his eyes still frighten me to this day. Not because of his power, but because every time I looked at them, it reminded me of what I could have become if I didn't have people like Iruka-sensei. I don't know how he is right now, but I hope he's found people to give him meaning. She took a deep breath. I know that it's not my place to say, but don't you think it's better for you here? There's so much more you can do here, and you don't have to die. I'm still best at fighting, though. You're the best in battle. It doesn't mean that you can't do anything else. She smiled at him. It was a discussion they'd had several times before, and one Naruto had been having with himself for just as long. Is it still hard, thinking about your village? It's difficult to say. I think of home every day, but it all seems so distant. Orochimaru and the Akatsuki were a constant danger, but I don't think they can find their way over here. At least he hoped not. He wouldn't put it past Orochimaru and Itachi to go after his new precious people just to use them against him. Sometimes I don't really know where I'm going. There's still my dream, and my friends back home, but now I have new people like you. You know you are always welcome here. There's always time for more dreams. He gave a nod. That's a nice thought to have. A sudden silence fell as he shuffled on his feet. Do you want to talk about Annie? The way Jean froze made him wince. Sorry, I didn't mean to watch. I thought it was a nightmare, didn't realize it was your memory. No, Jean whispered shakily. It's all right, that's not a memory I like to remember. I figured you would be seeing other things, the embarrassing moments, not the tragic ones. She took a deep breath. But I guess that the reason it's so prevalent is because I never wanted to talk about it, never let it go. Some memories are better than others, Naruto agreed. She was my best friend, Jean said with a hitch in her voice. We used to play after school all the time, but one day, I kicked her ball too hard, and she ran across the street to get it. She didn't look, there was a car, she bit her lip. I can barely remember what happened after that. It was all a blur. The coming days I was inconsolable, locked in my room, with things flying all around me, and I could hear everyone's voice in my head. I screamed and cried until my throat went numb. All I could think about was that all of it was my fault for kicking too hard. That wasn't your fault. Jean sighed. Everyone told me that, but I didn't believe it then. It's not something I've accepted fully even today. All of it stopped only when Professor Xavier visited. He put me into a deep sleep, and when I woke up, the voices were gone. I was enrolled in the institute soon after. The professor brought Aurora half a year later after his trip to Egypt, and she helped me to recover some peace of mind. Then it was Scott, and you after that. Naruto gave a nod. Sometimes it's hard to accept things. But I don't think it was your fault. You were just a kid. He chuckled nervously. Sorry, I'm probably not the best person to talk about this. She gave a small smile. No, you were good. It's nice to take things off my chest. Aurora descended the stairs, carrying another large backpack, walking towards the entrance where Jean had already parked her newly bought jeep. Sometimes he wondered why Jean wanted to drive when flying was easier and cost less. I trust that as my second in command you can keep the institute standing. Remember to keep a close eye on Bobby, and stop Rani from transforming near the furniture, and don't worry, I'll keep this ship afloat, Naruto said with a grin and thumbs up. I know you will. We'll see you in a couple of days, Aurora said while putting her bags in Jean's jeep. Wait up, came a voice from up the stairs. Rogue came down with a backpack of her own, dressed in hiking gear as well. Y'all got room for one more. Jean furrowed her brows. Are you all packed for 2 days in the wild? Yeah, packed ma own tent and everything. Sorry for the short notice. She continued to get some dubious stares. I ain't no amateur, if that's what you're worried about. Spent my fair share on the trails down south, and Logan's torture sessions should be enough to do the rest. There's going to be a lot of mosquitoes this time of year. Y'all don't think a Mississippi gal knows about mosquitoes? Jean chuckled. Fair enough. Put your bag in. Naruto helped her with the rest of her equipment. You sure about going? Rogue turned to him with a smirk. Sure need the time and space to clear my head. Why, you gonna miss me, ninja boy? Of course, he said, giving her a brief hug goodbye. Good to know, she said softly as they broke the hug, staring at him for a long moment before she got into the jeep. The engine soon turned on and the car drove out through the gate, leaving Naruto standing at the entrance, the institute more silent than it had been in the morning. He made his way back to the entertainment room, where most of the new members were relaxing. Roberto and Bobby were playing a match of table soccer with Sam watching, while Wanda and Shion were sitting in a corner reading books. He suppressed a laugh as he watched an annoyed Rani getting her short hair made up by Amara. It didn't take long for the students to come to him, asking about training, or assignments, or even where they would be going as a group. The only thing he could do was return an awkward smile and assure them that they were still too young to go out on assignments, and talk about some training later. The promise of training calmed some of them down and they returned to their activities. Jubilee assured them all she could beat them in Mario Kart. I've become Kakashi-sensei, he muttered to himself. Did that give him license to be late every now and then? He smiled when Kitty phased through the floor, all dressed up with her ponytail hairdo, a red buttoned shirt that showed off her midriff, black trousers and a pair of low-heeled sandals. She raised herself on her toes and pulled his head down for a kiss. Let's go, she said, pulling his arm. Naruto stood still. I don't know if I can trust the institute from imploding if nobody is here. He thought for a moment until a perfectly trustworthy Scottish girl walked past him. Rani, he whispered. Aye, Chief. Tell me if Bobby does something stupid when I come back. The redhead grinned. Dinna worry, Chief. Dolt ain't escaping me eyes. Most people would use their spring break time to relax. If they had the money, they went on a trip outside the city or even the country. If they didn't have the resources or were the more introverted sort, they stayed home to entertain themselves. Either way, they didn't spend their time volunteering for a renowned scientist in hopes of getting internships through college. Peter Parker was not most people. Neither was Gwen Stacy, for that matter. Peter took a deep breath to calm down the feeling of ants crawling around his stomach as he snuck several looks at the pretty blonde girl beside him. Both of them were carrying boxes of equipment to Dr. Kurt Connor's laboratory. Hopefully, volunteering with such a highly renowned scientist would give them extra credit, if the Stark scholarship didn't pan out. We're here, Dr. Con. Ours, Gwen's voice trailed off as both of them looked at the empty office. Huh, guess he must have left early. She placed her load on the table. I'll go get something to drink while we wait, Peter said and placed his burden as well, having volunteered to carry half of Gwen's weight added to his own. He made a show of struggling with the boxes. It wasn't really heavy, given his powers, but appearances had to be kept. Dr. Connors has been acting a bit odd lately. He can be a bit eccentric at times. Gwen let out a laugh. Eccentricity is part of being a genius. Not always, argued Peter. She gave him a smirk. You sure about that? That chronic tardiness of yours begs to differ, Pete. The hidden compliment didn't hit him until he retrieved the soft drinks from the vending machine. Peter returned and handed Gwen her drink. He'd known her long enough to know she liked the cherry flavor. As they both took advantage of the time to finish their notes, he looked up to steal a few discreet glances. She had always looked cute, but looked even cuter with the new hairstyle. His heart beat heavier when she saw her smiling at a text she got on her phone. He must be the luckiest dweeb in existence if someone like her talked to him. Gwen. Yeah. I heard about this pizza place. They say it's the best in Queens. Luigi's. The one with the sweet sauce. He swallowed dry air. It was now or never. Get a date, or be just another loser Gwen had no time for. That's the one. I was thinking. Yeah, I could go for a slice or two. Peter let out a silent breath and grinned. Real? I mean, that's great. And don't worry about the price, I'm buying. I'll hold you to it, genius, she replied with a dazzling smile. With a goofy grin, Peter strode towards Dr. Connor's office with the completed notes, his head in the clouds, thinking about finally going out on a date with Gwen Stacy. Up until he saw the shattered vial behind the desk. Taking out a device he'd built specifically for tracking chemical residue, he placed some of the leftover liquid into the test tube, gritting his teeth when the device revealed a match with the creature he'd spotted last night. With his blood pumping, he followed the scratch marks towards the bathroom, and to the shattered window beyond that. Peter returned to the lab, where Gwen was already waiting for him. God, she was pretty. Everybody at school knew that. All the school jocks had already asked her out, even Flash Thompson, but she had shot them all down. It made him think that she preferred the smart boys over the stupid ones. But not even Flash Thompson wasn't stupid enough to do what Peter was about to do. Hey, he started, looking sheepish and with a low voice. About that pizza place, do you mind if we put it off until next time? Peter winced at Gwen's disappointed tone. Some days, it was really hard being Spider-Man. Lack of sleep, having his grades drop, and the absence of most of his free time were sacrifices that he felt compelled to make. It didn't mean he had to enjoy it. Especially when the girl he'd had a crush on for so long had accepted a date. But he had to do it, or there would be far more children out there without an Uncle Ben. I am Spider-Man. Say the words. He couldn't say them. Peter would never forgive himself for putting her in such danger if he did. I'll make it up to you. Promise. He knew it wasn't true. Peter Parker could not afford to keep promises like Spider-Man could. He ran off without another word. As soon as he left the building, Peter stripped off his clothes, revealing the red, black, and blue outfit under them. Now he was Spider-Man, the one who everyone could count on. Having no time to waste, Peter immediately went to the area below the shattered glass and spotted more claw marks. The trail led further past the alley and near the small street, where the sewer entrance had been sliced open. Why does it always have to be the sewers? Why can't villains choose to make a cologne factory their secret base? Can't we have a perfume man? Perfume ma'am. The jokes didn't exactly help with the stench of human waste that pierced past his mask as he went down in pursuit. The sensor went haywire as soon as he fully entered the sewage system, marking every direction until it died out. Spider-Man sighed. He would have to put sensors through his path, and hope that one of them would trigger the lizard's tracks. At least there were still claw marks to guide his way. I could have had a pizza date with Gwen Stacy. Some genius I am. That should be enough. Naruto stopped channeling chakra into his hand and watched the Rasengan dissipate into the air. He stood up and stretched as Reed Richards continued to fiddle with the giant machine he had built in his laboratory, information spilling through an integrated computer that only the genius of the Fantastic Four could interpret. Well, we managed to make some progress. A signature of the same element is coming from a point in space. Naruto knew that there was always a catch. Does it point to somewhere specific? Reed closed his eyes and thought. It's specific on this Earth, but of course, that point expands as we go out of the atmosphere. Put it this way, we may have narrowed down the source of your chakra to around a fifth of the universe, but that just means we're now looking for a single grain of sand in one continent instead of the entire planet. I see. Naruto hopped down from the chair and walked out, arms behind his back. Thanks. I'll be in contact if you need me for anything else. Of course, said Reed as he returned to another project. Susan was sitting in the main room when he came out, reading a book. She sent him a smile. How did it go this time? We made some progress, but there's still a lot left to go. You don't seem all that bothered about the slow progress. Naruto shrugged. Guess I'm not. Is that a good thing or a bad thing? He stood still for a moment. What would he do if he had the means to go back to Konoha? Would he go immediately, leaving all his new friends behind? What would he do with Kitty? He had a duty to his village, and yet he also had new responsibilities. I don't know yet. Susan walked with him towards the open window. Things like that can take some time to find out. Good thing you have plenty of that. I guess so, he responded, stepping on the edge of the window. Thanks for everything. I'll come back to visit sometime. Naruto, what are you doing? He grinned as he stepped off the edge and towards the air, hearing Susan scream behind him. Using his powers, he levitated in place and grinned back at the relieved blonde. Use the stairs, she chastised. Boring. Kitty was still at the mall he had left her in a couple of hours ago. He arrived just at the agreed-upon time at the food court, where she was sitting with the friends she had made in dancing classes, Janet, Felicia, and Mary Jane. They were being approached by some boys that left some notes, probably with their phone numbers. "Should I be worried?" he asked Kitty. She laughed. "No way." Janet stood up with a grin. "All right, we have money to spend and no time to lose. Let's hit the stores already." It wasn't his first time going shopping with girls, but shopping with Janet Van Dyne and Felicia Hardy was on a whole different level than Jean or Aurora. They first hit the shoe store, where Kitty spent no less than an hour trying out different sandals, some heeled, some not. When he reminded her that she already had plenty, she retorted that those were last season's. Of course, she asked his opinion on every single one of them. She wasn't the only one that asked for his opinion. "Hey, Naruto, which one do you think matches my hair better?" asked Felicia, holding two pairs. Naruto honestly didn't know what to say, given that both were colored white, so he just mentally eeny-meenied his way out of the situation. "Naruto, which ones make me look cuter?" asked Janet as she tried on 5 pairs. Agonizing over choosing which one was best turned out to be pointless when she bought all of them, plus another 2. Mary Jane didn't ask for his opinion, because she didn't buy any. It being spring, the girls also didn't want to waste an opportunity to buy new swimwear, even though Kitty already had several outfits, and so once again he was dragged along by his girlfriend as she picked up a light purple 2-piece to try out. She also selected some swimming trunks for him to try out, despite his protests that he already had some. It wasn't the first time he had been confronted about his utilitarian approach to clothes, but Kitty was by far the most adamant. They weren't the only ones buying. "Look at you, totally beach body ready," Janet stated, looking at her bikini-clad reflection. It was yellow with a series of black waves. She struck a series of poses, as if her picture was being taken. "Oh yeah, thank you so much, Ms. Hunter." "Someone's confident," commented Felicia as she tried on a black 2-piece with white ruffles, showing off the athletic body that she worked on with dancing and gymnastics classes. "Confidence is important," retorted Janet. "It lets all the boys know that we are worth the world. Like those that were hitting on us. Not gonna give those guys a call," teased Felicia. Janet grinned. "You mean those skateboarder wannabes we saw earlier? No. Ew. Totally like, not my type." "Oh, you have a type?" "Yep. Blonde, blue eyes, and heroic," Janet breathed dreamily. "Of course," sighed Felicia, rolling her eyes and smirking at Kitty. "You heard that, kitty cat. Seems like Miss Van Dyne is perfectly describing your man." Janet dropped her pose and shook her head. No, not like that, kitty cat. I already have somebody I want to marry one day." "Here we go again," hummed Felicia. "There's only one person good enough for Janet Van Dyne, the Maelstrom." Naruto froze on the spot. That's right, he technically already knew Felicia and Janet, though in very different circumstances and always under a mask. He had apparently made such a first impression on Janet that she had created a loyal fan club for him. "My own fan club. I truly have become Sasuke Tem." He promised himself that he would be kinder to his fans than Sasuke was, at least. He expected Kitty to get angry, but she just laughed and winked at him. "How do you know the Maelstrom doesn't already have a secret girlfriend?" Janet flashed a confident grin and returned to her posing. "I like to believe in a little thing called destiny." All of them had another laugh. The first moment he had met Janet, she had reminded him of Kitty. They had the same height, build, liked the same cute things, the same upbeat music, and even talked in the same accent. Janet had a lot more money than Kitty, though, and was not exactly frugal with it. Sometimes, that meant she didn't know the situations of other girls, since her only real friend before meeting MJ and Kitty was the equally wealthy Felicia Hardy. Both of them went to a very reputable all-girls Catholic school, and stepping away from that environment was akin to Naruto traveling out of Konoha to know the real world for the first time. A slow, frequently awkward experience that one had to experience to get a taste of reality. "Look at this one, MJ," gushed Janet, picking up a wine-red 2-piece for her. It looked richly made, and even came with a matching transparent sarong for the waist. "It matches your hair perfectly." Mary Jane, who had yet to try anything in her entire trip, raised her hands. "I don't really think that's my style, Jan." Come on, it's perfect, insisted Janet, pulling on the redhead's arm and going towards the changing booth. With a roll of her eyes and a grin, Mary Jane took the suit and closed the door. She emerged from the booth after a few minutes, walking directly to the full-body mirror to check herself out. To say she was stunning was an understatement. After looking at her reflection, the reserved posture gave out as she struck several poses, and even flashed her pearly white smile. "I told you that was just right for you," said Janet with a smirk. "We should take advantage of the sun and go to the beach. I've wanted to return to this totally awesome hotel I went to in Nice when I was younger. We can get the tickets to go in a couple of days." That sounded quite beyond his hero budget. Janet seemed to notice the change in mood. "You know, on second thought, Daddy has a beach house in Florida he doesn't really use. We could go for a weekend, catch some sun, maybe take a dip in the ocean. My driver can take us there and back before we return to class. All we'd have to worry about is food." Kitty's eyes brightened up and pulled on Naruto's arm. "That sounds amazing. Come on, Naruto. Please, please, please." He wouldn't be around to do his hero duties for almost 2 weeks. That was something to consider. His vigilante team had been doing so much good precisely because they'd been so active. 2 weeks, that was a lot to ask. 2 hands circled his arm and pulled toward Kitty's chest. He looked at his side to see Kitty's hopeful hazel eyes and felt his heart melt. The bad guys had been silent these last few days, and they'd gone back to beating hoodlums and small drug pushers. Maybe heroes do deserve a break every once in a while. All right. Kitty pumped her fist and whooped, and Janet followed her lead, both of them jumping together and chanting. Naruto couldn't help but feel warm inside. It felt right to give something to Kitty after she had given him so much. He noticed Mary Jane staring at her reflection once again, her smile gone now that nobody was looking, but still holding the transparent sarong with want. "Coming too, MJ." Her head snapped back to him and the smile came back. "I'd have to check if my aunt has something planned." "Come on, MJ. You only get to live once." The redhead played with her lips for a moment, until she smirked at them. "Well, wouldn't want to deprive the Sunshine State of Mary Jane Watson." Kitty and Janet cheered again as they got dressed and went along with Felicia to the cashier. Naruto hung back after letting the girls prepare first, enough for him to watch Mary Jane put the bikini back on the rack after one last forlorn glance. Felicia was very different from Janet despite going to the same school and being of the same economic standing. The platinum blonde was the most reserved and mature of Kitty's group of friends. That didn't mean she lacked a playful nature, or an eye for the expensive. "Hey Naruto. Come here," she called when they visited the most luxurious store they'd been to yet, filled with jewels, designer clothing, and handbags. Yes. Naruto walked over to see Felicia in the clothing section, strangely enough, the men's clothing section. She grinned at him and showed him a black leather jacket. "Looks nice, doesn't it? Why don't you try it on?" He studied the garment for a bit. Never having been someone who paid much importance to clothing until girls coerced him to change his looks, he didn't know what to think. "It's nice, I guess, but I think it's a little out of my price range." "It's just to try it. I think it will fit you quite nicely, and help you improve your image. I always thought that character was more important than how I dressed." "That's true, but having luxuries enhances the man and those around him. Put it on." Naruto didn't argue any longer and slipped on the jacket. Grinning, she called to the side. "Kitty cat, come over and tell us what you think." "Give me a moment, I'm just looking at this cute little purse and, oh wow." Kitty's face flushed when she laid eyes on him. "Don't you look dashing?" She posed next to him beside the mirror, with a grin, before going back to what she was trying to buy. Felicia turned to him with a smug smirk. "Character counts, more than anything." She grabbed a pearl necklace and twirled it around her fingers, "but pretty things are important too." He looked down at one of the bags he was carrying. "I guess that's true." Deciding that they wanted to rest their feet a little, the group went to an ice cream shop next to a music store. While Kitty was dancing happily with Janet to the newest Alison Blair single, Naruto approached Mary Jane. "Doing all right." She smiled at him. "I'm doing fine. Good to be wiping the slate clean. New school and new friends." "That's good." He sat in awkward silence for a moment before passing one of the many bags he was carrying to her. You forgot this. Mary Jane furrowed her brows as she peeked into the bag, and looked at him with a flushed face. Oh my god, Naruto, why would you spend so much money on such a thing? I saw you looking at it. It may not seem like it, but I don't exactly come from money myself. I know what it's like to wish for things that seem out of reach, except in dreams. Yeah, but, $50 for a bikini. That's not really within my budget, or yours for that matter. I know, but you wanted it. Mary Jane gave a solemn smile. Oh Naruto, if I could have everything I wanted in the world, there'd be nothing left to dream about. He laughed. Well, this isn't the world, you can take it and still have plenty of dreams. Besides, I want my friends to be happy, and $50 is a low price to pay for that. She giggled. You do need to stop sometimes. Keep buying me stuff and you'll soon make a habit of it. It's not a bad habit to have. Perhaps, but you should take care of yourself first and foremost. After you goes your closest people, including a girlfriend that might not be too happy with you putting other girls before her. What does Kitty have to do with this? Naruto, she said with a deadpan voice. You bought a girl a bikini. What's wrong with that? She took a very long, very deep breath and gave a chuckle. Nothing, I guess. Just remember to prioritize your girlfriend first. He grinned back. Trust me, I'm spending more than $50 on her tonight. Kitty came back from her dance with a smile after Mary Jane had gone to buy some sewing equipment. She plopped down on the seat next to him and rested her head on his shoulder. Hey, pretty kitty. Yeah. Can I ask you something? Sure. Where are we going? He let the question hang for a bit. I mean, where do you see all of this going? Maybe it's a silly question, but I've been asking myself a lot of those lately. When I became interested in you, I thought it'd be fun, you know. Everybody talks about having a boyfriend, but all the boys were jerks to me, until you came. It's been like, totally nice having someone to kiss and hug. But I didn't know where I was going. I've just been totally caught up in the moments and I've felt myself getting closer to you. Where do you think this ends? When we go to college. If I go back to Konoha. Marriage. Kitty was still for a few moments, her hand sliding down to grab his. I don't know where this is going to take us. You're my first boyfriend, and I know most times your first one isn't your last one. She gripped his hand tightly. But you're not just something for fun, Naruto. Naruto ran his fingers through her hair. I think that answers my question. Kitty turned to him and their lips met. He didn't know where this would be going either, or what would happen if a way back to Konoha was found. For the moment, he was content to be with a girl that seemed to truly like him, tailed monster and all. A vibration in his pocket made him break the kiss. He took out his phone to see the reminder and groaned. Gotta run for now. See you at 8. She grinned. Sure. Best time to get something to eat before we go back to babysit. He nodded, smiling. He didn't want to spoil the surprise. Normally, Wesley was not someone that would ever question his boss. It was a lesson he had learned a long time ago, when Wilson Fisk was still an unknown hood who had taken over one of the Magia's businesses without losing a single man. But now, seeing what he was seeing, the old doubts were beginning to creep in. Are you sure about this? We already have our men in place, the police, and Mr. Trask's project on our side. There's no need for this. Wilson Fisk did not bat an eye. I prefer this night to be thorough. Call it insurance. Besides, he is a government asset. Makes keeping our involvement a secret a mutual interest. It was insurance all right, though he did not know for which side. I need a red, muttered the man. He was built like a brick house, almost as tall as Fisk himself, with short blonde hair and a tattoo of the American flag on his face. Give me a red. The other man, a handler of sorts, shook his head. Not yet, Nuke. We're still in Baghdad airport, about to head for Afghanistan. Take a blue for now. Our boys in Kabul are counting on you. Our boys. Yes, they're being pinned down out there. It's up to you to help them. He held out a blue pill for the man named Nuke to take. Once he swallowed the pill, the man immediately relaxed. The reddened face went back to a pale color, and the bulging veins of his neck and arms hid beneath the skin. "Where is Betsy?" The handler grabbed a large assault rifle with a grenade launcher attachment and gave it to him. The man held onto the rifle like a normal person would hold a lover, caressing the cold metal slowly. But even with his calmed posture, his eyes burned with the same mad, murderous intensity as before. Our boys, our boys. What do you think, kid?" Naruto inspected the metal suit currently being painted in red and gold. "I dunno, seems like something extremely cumbersome to me. I prefer to move freely." Tony chuckled. "Believe it or not, superpowers are a rarity in this world. My specific superpower is my brain, well and my wealth, charisma, good looks, and unquestionably good judgment. With technology, everything is possible. But without that technology, you're screwed. I have all of my abilities with me at all times. For the moment, kid. One day, technology will make even the greatest magic seem paltry." He clicked a few buttons and the displays moved around until Naruto's suit came into view once again. Anyway, back to business. Managed to clean up the air filtration system. Everything else was fine. Do you even use all the features? Naruto gave him a sheepish look. Honestly, I don't really need them. They're fine and all, but I'm just fine using my own abilities. Tony sighed. Fair enough. Whatever gets you through, I guess. You may not realize it, but what you've done in this city has impacted the rest of the world as well. I've had to deal with less arms shipments now that you've been disrupting the supply chain. Naruto stared out the window, looking towards the sea past the Statue of Liberty. I'd like to go out there sometimes, deal with the really big threats. Now, that's not how this works. We have a system in place here. Young ones like you stay here and play in the kiddie pool while us grown-ups go to the deep end to hunt for sharks. Told you I'm not a kid, growled Naruto. Tell that to protective services, kid, retorted Tony with a grin as he guided him back to the exit. The door opened and in came a red-headed woman dressed like a secretary, carrying some documents. As she came closer, Naruto's memory began to kick in. The face that triggered something soon became recognizable. He had seen it in the darkness, being assaulted by a stranger. Hey, he said without thinking. He stopped then. Sometimes it was hard to forget the people he helped as the maelstrom didn't know who he really was. The woman raised a blue eye at him. I'm really pretty, Naruto said weakly. Oh, the redhead said with a smile. That's good to know. Tony laughed. Hey now, Natalia is my personal secretary, kid. Don't steal her from me. Very funny, Mr. Stark, said Natalia, handing him some papers. The board meeting is in 30 minutes, here's the documents you asked for. Right. Sorry kid, have some business to attend to. We'll continue talking about the grant later, he said with a wink. As soon as Naruto walked out of the office, he looked at his watch to confirm the time. 5 o'clock, 3 hours until he had to pick up Kitty from the mall. He had expected to spend more time with Stark, but he could always go back with Kitty and help her with any leftover shopping she had to do. That's when he felt the phone buzz again. Got something for you. It's a big one. Emma. Damn it, why does it have to be today? He could always say no. Hadn't they already whittled down the criminal element to almost nothing? After taking a deep breath he took to the sky and towards Emma's hideout. He still had 3 hours left. Surely he could take the goons out and go back for dinner with the girl, right? I'm here, he announced as soon as he arrived at the building, going directly to Emma's hidden office. He found her behind the desk, dressed as provocatively as always. What was this thing you have? Emma smirked. Calm down, darling. Sit down and relax. Naruto shook his head. Don't have time for that today. I have something planned with Kitty at 8. And you'll only make it miserable for the both of you if you go all agitated like that. Sit down, have some tea, or water at least. This won't take long. He made his way to the usual seat at the sofa. As soon as he sank on the soft cushion and smelled Emma's light incense, he began to breathe easier. The blonde soon came with her Turkish tea set and poured him some pomegranate tea. Emma's hand settled on his shoulders and began to give them a light rub, relaxing him even further. Feeling better? She asked softly. Yeah. Good. She sat closely next to him and poured herself a cup of tea as well. Here's what I have for you. Hell's Kitchen, 7 sharp. All of the bosses have called a meeting. Tensions between them have never been higher, so they're all going to that construction place near the harbor. All of them are bringing a lot of men and guns. Sounds like I'm going to need a lot of backup for this. Well, not necessarily. See, the important thing here is that this is the meeting where he is coming. The man you've been hunting all this time, Wilson Fisk. Naruto's eyes snapped open. He's finally coming out. That's right, and that's the moment you can strike. All you have to do is cut off the head and the rest of the body falls to the ground. But, if all of them are meeting at the same time, don't you think this is the best instance to call the police? We can tell Captain Stacy. Emma shook her head. George Stacy is an honorable man, but the same cannot be said about all his men. All it takes is one call and Wilson Fisk will call the entire thing off. It has to be you, darling. There is no other way. Naruto sat still. There had to be something else, at least tell Daredevil and Peter about this. They had been in this fight even longer than him. But the meeting was earlier than when their usual shift began. He could tell Peter, but that was about it. When he tried to call him though, the line kept on dying. Guess it'll have to be me, he sighed. Emma smiled and patted at her lap. Come here, there's still time for you to rest a while. It was something they had been doing for a few days now. Naruto stretched on the couch and laid his head on Emma's bare lap, feeling her fingers caressing his blonde hair. His eyes closed, preparing to get some sleep before he had to be the maelstrom again. Want to tell me what's hurting your head this time? Naruto let out a breath, feeling his muscles slacken. It was a trick Emma had taught him as well. I guess, I'm just wondering about the meaning of my life. Truly. That question is uncharacteristically philosophical of you. Maybe, but you're a good philosophy teacher. Like that Sakura guy. Socrates. That's the one. Glad I could impart some wisdom from the ancients. She was silent for a few minutes. As for your question, in a perfect world, that's not something the average person would ask. Because everyone would be fulfilled. Because everyone would know their place. Asking your role in the world is not something the average doldrums should ask because they don't have the capacity to understand such meanings. Naruto furrowed his brow. So you don't think I should be asking that question? She laughed. I don't mean you, Naruto. You're different, special. The answer for you will come in time. You don't seem to think well of the average person. Emma scoffed. Of course not. Have you ever had a conversation with the common idiot and realized just how empty their mind is? It's not just the uneducated, mind you. If anything, the educated imbecile at the university is even worse, because he is so convinced about his own brilliance that he brings others down with him. For a time, we had functioning societies, you know. The men who were bred and raised for leadership actually led, while the people who were bred for different tasks fulfilled them without troubling their immature minds about the world. And then a coterie of Parisian cretins decided to ruin that by deciding that the common dimwit should have a role in matters of state. Of course, they all lost their heads in the end to the common dimwits. You reap what you sow. I've always believed that people should be allowed to make their own fate, argued Naruto. Some people, perhaps. Most people will simply destroy themselves, and the world as well, she hummed, stroking his hair again. But I do think you have the capacity to make your place in this world, Naruto. Whatever that may be. And where do you think my place would be in such a world? Your actions will determine that, darling. Naruto kept that thought in his head as he drifted off to sleep. The symphony of the city sang to him, a tune that he knew all too well. The honking of cars, the crashing of waves, the screeching of the subway system, and the running of sewer water. Every day and every night he hears the same song, so much that he could immediately spot any slip in the melody. The clinking of guns, and the angry meeting of a dozen tongues. But that was not his target for this night. His ears caught yet another distraction, more subtle, and far more deadly. He could hear the mechanism of the bolt turning, and the brass bullet being loaded. Daredevil opened his eyes to see a world on fire. His hand grasped for the billy club strapped to his leg and extended the connecting wire, sending it towards the hanging gargoyle to swing from roof to roof, each step getting him closer to his target. The rifle was lifted, an exhale left the man's lungs, followed by a deep breath, and the pressing of a finger to the trigger. Daredevil could see it all and nothing at the same time. The wire unhooked from the steel bar, his leg poised to strike at the breathing man below. In coordinated perfection, his foot met the man's head, sending him to the ground while the rifle tumbled down the sight, hitting several floors before landing on the dirt below. The man was shockingly quick to recover. All of his muscles were tensed, heart pumping louder and faster. "The devil of Hell's Kitchen," he muttered coldly. "You want these men gone as much as I. Why do you fight me? I want them gone, to prison, where they can serve their sentence after a fair trial. Not dead. You stand in defense of these degenerates." Daredevil shook his head. "No, in defense of justice. I seek my own justice, devil." The tightening of muscles, the sliding of steel, and the gritting of teeth. The Punisher was willing to fight. Daredevil raised his club to meet the singing steel approaching from his right. The crunching of gravel on his right alerted him to the kick that came soon after. The steel changed hands and swiped towards his stomach. There was no movement to his left, and he reached for a kick to the side, blocked just in time by the Punisher's free hand. His ear catches the conundrum below, the sounds of many dialects shouting at each other, a New York chorus. Right hand tensing, ready to strike, but it's a feint for the steel-bearing left hand. Daredevil steps aside. The left leg is relaxed, so he aims for the rib. He hits, but is too late to catch the kick at his chest. Both separate, breathing loudly. "Let me do my job and you do yours, devil. It is the system's place to judge. Solutions handed down by the laws of God and men. My solutions are permanent." A kick, a punch, Daredevil sweeps back to avoid them, then raises his head just in time to avoid the whistling edge of the dagger. His foot sweeps up, kicking Punisher's head just as a punch lands on his face. Both fall on the floor and make space once again. "What do you save, devil, when you refuse to punish these men?" "My soul," responded Daredevil. He made ready to strike again, his muscles tensing to jump down. The Punisher's breathing was louder, and so was the shouting of the men below. But there was something else. His ears reached down below the ground, enough to hear another instrument in the cacophonous symphony. Beep, beep, beep. Emma hadn't been kidding about the amount of men. His activated eyes caught around 200 different signatures. Most of them were gathering at the center of the construction site, where a small clearing was still visible. A smaller number of snipers had populated the unfinished buildings. Every one of them was armed to the teeth. Gone were the days where most of them carried either a knife or a handgun. Assault rifles dominated the scene, each of them held by men that looked more professional than the usual hoods. These were the cream of the crop. The gangs were not kidding around anymore. From each of their mouths came all of the languages of New York. Naruto picked up Spanish, Russian, Chinese, Italian, and even Japanese. Truly, every single criminal organization had found their way into this one place. As he got closer, he picked out his binoculars to see the men who were taking center stage. Men with faces he recognized, and names he had put to memory. There was the yellow-toothed Russian, Vladimir Ranchikov, notorious human trafficker, Rafael and Fernando Gutierrez, brothers of the deceased Joaquin Gutierrez, leaders of the New York cartel, Silvermane, the elderly leader of the Mafia, Fincooley, foremost illegal arms trafficker and boss of the Irish mob. He could not place a name on the Japanese man or the Chinese woman. Ranchikov was the first to address the crowd. "Enough waiting," he snapped, fist hitting the makeshift table. "This disruption has gone on for far too long. 2 years ago, we all came around to make a deal. Each of our organizations would take over particular areas and take over a specific business. But now, I see that some want to take, how Americans say, entire pie for yourselves. We're not the only one bein' hit, mucker. It's them batty maskers that are causing all the problems," replied Finn. Raphael stood up. "Puro El Russo, the Russian, has a point. If they take 1 or 2 of our crystal operations, no hay problema. But they have information about our shipping, and even some of our labs. Those are secrets only known to a few. Which can mean only one thing." "Somebody is talking," growled Ranchikov. "Not to police, but to vigilantes." "Who are you going round accusing, mate?" replied Finn with a glare. "You have any idea how many guns I've lost? How do I know you aren't a rat? How many guns you lost? How about how much product I lost? Slammed the Russian and pointed at the Gutierrez brothers. And what about you, UBL Yudki? We. Fernando, the youngest and clearly most hot-headed of the Gutierrez brothers, took out his gun. Mataron a nuestro hermano, pendejo. In unison, all of the men stood up and took hold of their weapons, and aimed them at each other, trading insults and accusations. The Chinese woman, relaxed until now, picked up a defensive posture. What Naruto assumed was the leader of the Japanese contingent, placed his hand atop the pommel of the sword strapped at his side. In the center of the storm of shouting, a lone man sat in tranquility, rising to his full height slowly. Silvermane tapped the table with his cane rhythmically until one by one, the insults of a dozen tongues began to subside. When all was silent, he raised his aged face and looked at all of them, and asked a single question. "Where is Fisk?" Spider-Man sighed as he rested at one of the main rooms of the sewer system. 4 different tunnels led to pathways that had already been placed with sensors. In addition, he had spent the entire day arranging a system of webs that would send any large movements towards this point where he lay in wait. He had concentrated on the sewage paths that led to both Dr. Connor's house as well as his laboratory. He could only hope that his intuition was correct to catch the lizard before he had to explain to Aunt May why he came back after midnight smelling like he'd been in the sewers. What a day. Laying back on the hammock he'd made from his own webbing, Spider-Man took out the serum he'd worked on when he first got the lizard's DNA. Now that he knew that Dr. Connors was behind it, and the specifics of the formula, it was a simple matter of reverse engineering to get the cure. Ah, if only my personal life was as easy as chemistry. A sense of unease began to creep into him. Everything was just way too quiet, and yet his spidey sense was continuously screaming at him that something was horribly wrong. Rising from the hammock, Spider-Man crawled to one of passageways, away from both the points he had marked as potential lizard routes but closer to where his intuition was telling him. Eventually, he found a fork in the road that he believed would lead him directly below Hell's Kitchen, quite away from the lizard's points of interest. There was a corner that looked fairly cleaned up lately. An iron door laid at the end of the path, and the closer he got the more urgent was the sense of unease. When he tried to open the handle, he realized it was welded shut. The door itself was rusty, but upon closer inspection, the welds were recent, in fact, couldn't have been made more than a few hours ago. Taking out his small chemist gear, Spider-Man made a quick concoction with the materials he had left and fed them to the weak point in the iron handle. When he combined the elements together, it quickly began to eat at the metal. Stealing his nerves, Spider-Man grabbed the door and, after taking a deep breath, pushed it open, ready to fight against a superpowered lizard-human hybrid. Instead, his eyes were met with thousands of wires and explosives, all of them connected to a digital clock, displaying numbers in red, each counting coming with a loud beep, each one sending a thrust into his spidey sense. 29. 28. 27. Holy shit. And then Mother Sarah came and took all of my drawings, complained Janet with a groan, plopping her head to the table. Those were some nice drawings too, but she said I shouldn't be idolizing outlaws and that I should be focusing on math again. She screamed into her hand. I hate it. Stupid nuns, stupid school. Kitty giggled, taking another spoonful of her strawberry ice cream. They had left their shipping bags with Felicia's driver but decided to come back for treats before they left. Well, school is important. Puts you on the path for your career. I'm going into fashion, Janet said confidently. I'll be doing all the designs for the top actors and singers, and even the heroes. I mean, Maelstrom's outfit is great, but it could do with some touches. Agreed, replied Mary Jane. Black is cool, and probably convenient, but I think he could do with a little more color. Totally, chirped Janet with a grin. A little yellow will look great in the night. Maybe red. Dark red. The way his eyes turn sometimes. Kitty giggled at the thought. If Naruto could choose any color other than black, he would go for orange. You also want to go into design, MJ. I'm going to do a bit of everything. Design being one of those things. Maybe after I get bored of modeling and acting. You do have a smile fit for a model, said Felicia. Kitty hummed in agreement. What about you, Felicia? The platinum blonde raised a brow. My goals are a little short-term. But they include a lot of pearl necklaces and diamonds. Their laughing was cut short by a series of thundering sounds, each one growing louder and louder. The senses Logan had beaten into Kitty made her stand up. The explosion rocked the entire building, empty as it was now at night. Screams from the lower floors erupted when pieces of concrete began falling down. Her friends all took cover beneath the table as small pieces landed beside them. The lights went out, leaving only darkness. "What's going on?" whispered Janet, stuttering her words. "Is it an earthquake?" "I don't think so," Felicia whispered back. "You mean, another attack?" A creeping fear crawled into her voice. "Is it terrorists again?" "I don't know, but if it is, then we need to get out now," said Mary Jane. Kitty felt the redhead's hand grabbing her own, fingers gripping tightly. "We are a team, aren't we? Ms. Hunter said so. We stay together." Her voice had never sounded so strong. Kitty reassured by gripping her fingers back and using her other hand to find Janet's. "You don't let go, Jan." "Why yes, of course." Janet's voice was still startled. Naruto had once told her that one cannot be brave until you've experienced fear. "Does anybody have a light?" asked Kitty. Felicia shuffled around her bag. "I got my phone." "It'll have to do. You lead the way." The dim light of Felicia's flip phone didn't allow them to see much, it at least let them find their footing. The blonde led the way, followed by Mary Jane, then Kitty, and Janet at the end, all of them holding hands tightly. "Elevator's going to be busted," whispered Mary Jane. "Take a turn to the left. There should be some emergency stairs down the hall," said Janet. Kitty let out a nervous laugh. "You know every nook and cranny around here, don't you?" "Of course. This is my personal little fiefdom." The giggles were enough to improve morale as they walked carefully down the hall. Moonlight began to spill through the now shattered windows, but it revealed an unfortunate piece of concrete blocking the way to the emergency stairs. "What do we do now?" asked Janet as more pieces of concrete began falling behind them. Felicia furiously tapped on her phone. "I can't get a signal." Taking a deep breath, Kitty gripped the hands of her friends tightly. "Okay," she whispered strongly. "I'm going to do something that's totally going to freak you out. But you have to keep holding on to me. Felicia, you hold on to MJ. Do not let go, even for a single second." "What is it?" asked Janet. "Just don't let go," she said one last time. She reached out for her powers and felt her feet beneath to phase through the ground, taking more energy with her as she pulled 3 other girls with her. She heard Mary Jane and Felicia gasp. "Oh my God," breathed Janet. "Don't let go," she said again as their bodies went slowly down to the floor below, floating on air for a few moments before they phased through the next floor, and the one after that. "What just happened?" asked Felicia once they hit the ground floor. "I'll tell you when we have time," responded Kitty while they followed the sounds of screaming and banging that were coming from the entrance. Around 100 late shoppers were still inside the mall, all of them trapped by the debris that was blocking the entrance. Panic led some of them to lay on the floor praying, others to scream and shout at the outside, while some tried with all their might to pull out the increasing pile of debris falling on their escape route. "Listen," Kitty cried, though her voice was drowned by everyone else. "Hold on to me. We can get out." Mary Jane let go of her hand, walked towards a display and confidently smashed the glass with a nearby chair to pull out a megaphone. Climbing atop the debris, she turned on the alarm of the megaphone until everyone paid attention to her. "All right now, we're going to get out of here. Everybody needs to hold on to one person with each hand, and at the end, one of those people needs to be holding onto me or one of my friends here. When we're ready, we're going to walk forward." "Are you crazy? What are we gonna sing in Kumbaya too?" Mary Jane glared at the man. "Well, stay here, then." She stepped down and went back to grab Kitty's hand. "This is nonsense," came a voice from the side. "Shut up and hold my hand," growled Janet. Kitty waited until everyone had time to connect to her. One by one she felt all their bodies connecting with her own, sharing in her powers. Concrete smashed behind her, as the building began to tremble. With a deep breath, she took a step forward, and carried 100 lives on her shoulders. Phasing had become easier with training, so much so that doing it with a partner was as easy as by herself. Doing it with 3 people took some extra strength, but it was still manageable. She had never done anything with 100 people. A weight immediately fell into her shoulders when 10 people entered into the concrete, and got heavier with every passing one. Gritting her teeth, she placed another foot forward and another 20 people passed inside. A gasp left her lips, her entire body feeling like she had run a marathon when all of them went in. She never wanted to fall to collapse as much as she did now, it was too much. But then she felt Mary Jane tighten her grip, as if giving some strength to her. Janet did the same. In her closed eyes she saw Naruto. Strong, dependable Naruto, who pushed through even when it seemed impossible. With a scream, she placed one foot forward, and another until her toes could feel the cool air of the outside. She emerged with a gasp, holding on as the rest of the bodies passed through, each one taking more weight from her shoulders. As soon as the last person finally passed through, the silence exploded into a cheer. Kitty felt the world drowning around her as she finally let go. Her entire body wobbled, and as her vision turned spotty, her legs gave out. But she did not hit the ground. Before darkness claimed her, she saw her friends gathered around her, worry plastered on their faces. She could only hope that wherever Naruto was, he was safe. Peter grunted as he raised his body once again, the huge slab of steel and concrete finally giving into his strength. He could feel blood seeping from various cuts, though thankfully none in any organs. Come on, come on. With a final push, the large piece of debris gave way for him to slip out and collapse on the floor. Peter took a much-needed deep breath and immediately coughed as dust filled his lungs, each sending spasms of pain through his body. Peter felt his body, mostly bruised, and thankfully no broken bones, but his left leg was in agony. He opened his eyes to see a piece of rebar had pierced through. Gritting his teeth, he placed shaking fingers on the metal and quickly pulled it out. As he dropped his body back on the uncomfortable debris, his mind replayed what he had seen. If he had wasted a single moment after seeing the explosives, he would have been dead. As it was, his ears were still ringing, his head juggling back and forth trying to regain its balance. Just what the hell had happened? The ringing slowly began to stop, but was immediately replaced with the sounds of shouting and gunfire. Lots of gunfire. Far more than any he had ever heard in all his long nights of fighting the city's criminal underbelly. A tingle exploded in his head. In spite of the pain, Peter flung his wounded form in the air, landing on the edge of a steel bar just as razor-sharp claws sliced through the piece of concrete he'd been laying in. Another wave of dust followed the crashing of the figure. When the air finally cleared, so had Peter's eyesight. The green-scaled creature was bigger than any man Peter had seen, and he was almost as wide as he was tall, every inch covered in rippling muscles. A long tail sprouted from beneath the white coat that gave away the figure's identity. A forked tongue slithered past long fangs, each as long as a grown man's hand as they licked claws sharp enough to slice steel. "Looking for me, Spider-Man?" rattled the lizard, yellow eyes locking onto him. "Well, it was you or a date with the prettiest girl in New York." Feeling flattered, the lizard growled again as he posed his body for another leaping attack. Spider-Man's body felt like it had been used as a punching bag. Each breath burned his lungs, and his leg was pouring blood, agony shooting through his body any time he put pressure on it. Yet even through the pain, he knelt down, ready to counter any attack from his opponent. "I'm going to need more than one slice of pizza after this." Spider-Man vs. the Lizard. He opened his eyes to a world on fire. But it was not just his eyes this time. He could feel the flames licking at his skin, and the sickening stench of burning concrete and flesh filling his nostrils. His ears were ringing wildly, and for Daredevil, it was as good as being blind. He stood up to feel away from the fire, hands in front of him as guides through the maze of steel and gravel. A familiar breath soon made itself known as soon as his hearing began to recover. Slowly, Daredevil trekked through the little spaces until he reached the voice. The breathing was short, courtesy of the steel bar that was crushing the Punisher's ribs. "Come to finish it," grunted Punisher through gritted teeth. "It's not my job to do so," he replied. With bruised hands, Daredevil gripped the top of the bar, and felt Punisher grab the low point. After taking a deep breath, he pulled with all his available strength until the heavy steel was lifted with their combined efforts. With the weight gone, Daredevil held Punisher's arms to pull him out of the remaining gravel. He fell on the ground, breathing heavily, Punisher doing the same in front of him. His mind tried to recollect moments before the explosion. What happened? Punisher finally asked. You're not the only man who wanted those people dead, he replied. Seems the truce, however flimsy it was, has finally been broken. Looks like it's going to be all-out war now, and the winner takes all. There won't be a winner, vowed the Punisher. The cracking of guns erupted, along with shouting. Screams and insults reached his recovered hearing. The fight was not over yet, but he didn't know what good he could do. A quick self-examination confirmed 2 broken toes and a sprained ankle. He could still stand up, if he only had a few minutes to rest. But the fighting came to them. 2 men, almost as torn up as they were steadily approaching. Their arms were holding weapons as they whispered in confused Spanish to one another. His hands reached for the holster to find nothing there. Reaching towards the ground he found a piece of rebar, ready to throw it at the men. A thunderous barrage ended their lives before they could come. Daredevil could hear him now. Massive in size, blood pumping unnaturally, his very breath dripping with murderous intent. Our boys, they are here. Pinned down. He glanced towards the Punisher. Ready for this? No, but when do we have a choice? Our boys. Came the raging voice. Our boys. Daredevil and Punisher vs. Nuke. There was only darkness when Naruto regained his senses. He opened his mouth for a deep breath, and nearly choked as he swallowed only water. Desperation gripped him as the oxygen slowly ran out and his lungs felt like they were about to explode. Kicking and wading through the water, he looked upward to see a slight shimmer of light. That was all he needed. The air Naruto breathed in when he emerged was rank and filled with smoke. The best air that had ever filled his lungs. Coughing, he swam towards the edge of the water, dragging himself onto shore and laid down to catch his bearings. He saw the reddened sky above him, and the flames that surrounded him. He could only imagine that this is what hell would look like. The smoke hurt his lungs when he breathed in, but he did so anyway, coughing when he took too much in. His first coherent thoughts were about Kitty. The mall was not that far off from this construction site. Was she safe? He hoped so. His girlfriend had been learning how to take care of herself ever since the asteroid affair, but he still had to worry. He wanted nothing more than to fly to her now, just to confirm that she was alright. The mansion had to be alright, they were far away from the action, where nothing could harm them. Still, it was his responsibility to be back for tonight. Some adult he turned out to be. What happened? He finally asked himself. He remembered the heads of the gangs arguing, and stopping to hear Silvermane ask where Fisk was. Everybody went silent after that, and panic overtook their eyes when the realization hit. But it had been too late at that point. The earth gave in beneath them, sending chunks of ground flying to the sky. Naruto remembered being rocked completely before something hit the back of his head. A sound came at his side. He stood silent to hear a man croaking in Russian. Naruto stood up with a moan and walked over to see the figure laying on his back, with a piece of metal sticking out of his stomach. Help! Help! The man moaned, blood spurting out of his mouth. Naruto stood up to help him until more footsteps came along. A man in police gear came in, rifle at the ready. Naruto sighed in relief until the officer surveyed the area and took out a pistol, pressed it against the wounded Russian's head, and pressed the trigger. What the hell? He shouted. The officer turned and aimed his rifle at him. Bullets flew but he dodged at the side quickly and delivered a kick to the gut and a punch at the face. That only alerted all the other figures around him, and soon enough, lights from countless rifles were pointed in his direction. Pushing chakra into his feet, Naruto jumped high into the air just as the ground was peppered by bullets. He ran into cover through the remains of one of the buildings, and was about to catch his breath when the flash of a blade almost split his face in two. Huh. A figure dressed all in black emerged from the shadows, the garb covering everything except for the eyes, a katana in hand. Dozens more emerged from the holes made by the debris like a swarm of bats, silently stalking the officers with kunai, shuriken, and ninjutsu in hand, only making themselves known when the slaughter of policemen and criminals alike began. The man in front of him placed an Oni mask on his face and prepared for another strike. Naruto activated his eyes, to see absolutely nothing. Dodging just in time, he pushed himself even higher up the debris. He turned his Sharingan to the rest of the figures. Nothing. It was as if these were corpses, and yet they moved faster and more practiced than any living men. There was absolutely no chakra signature at all. They were alive and dead at the same time. Ahi. Naruto turned to see a dozen very alive and very armed men pointing rifles at him and jumped back down, bullets whistling past his head. He landed right in the middle of a large clearing left by the explosion, breathing heavily. More armed men in police gear emerged, the light of the moon at their backs as they shouted orders at each other and took cover. Opposite them, at several points of the leftover buildings, the hardened criminals aimed their own weapons both at the cops and at each other. Hidden in the shadows were the ninjas, all of them converging on the man with the Oni mask. The world stood silent except for the running of water and the flickering flames as everyone waited for the fighting to begin. "Is there anybody else?" Naruto shouted. A loud crash shook the ground, followed by another, and another, as they landed indiscriminately around the crater, kicking up dust. Barely lighted by the moonlight, the figures emerged from the shadows. Humanoid objects made out of metal, each one 6 times the height of a normal adult, colored gray and purple. They stood up, 5 in all, and fixed their sight directly at him. Target identified. Sentinels initiating offensive action. Naruto groaned. "I just had to open my big mouth." Naruto vs. everyone.